good thoughts and telephone calls from now and again. No doubt he's watching us. So he sounds much improved to me, but he says that he has a way to go, so we continue to have him in our thoughts. Thank you very much. Statements by ministers.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on National Partnership Day, which was on October 25.
Thank you very much. You can proceed.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, as we came together to mark National Partnership Day on Wednesday, October 25, 2023, we were reminded of the collective spirit, unity, and shared vision that bind the people of Jamaica. This day was not just a date on our calendar. It became a symbol of our nation's journey, the testament of our shared endeavors, and the promise of our united future. National Partnership Day underscores Jamaica's enduring legacy, that our strength lies not just in the beauty of our landscapes or the rhythm of our music, but in the harmony of our partnerships. These are the partnerships that exist between our government agencies, our businesses, civil societies, churches, communities, and every individual who calls this beautiful island home. The idea of partnership transcends formal alliances and agreements. At its core, it speaks to the spirit of kinship, collaboration, and mutual respect. Most partnership efforts around the world only include the government, private sector, and unions. But of course, Jamaica has to be special. Our partnership, in addition to the government, private sector, and unions, also involves partners from other sectors, partners from civil society, the church, academia, and of course, the opposition. National collaboration plays a pivotal role in national transformation by pooling diverse resources, expertise, and perspectives together to address the multifaceted challenges that our country faces. No single entity or sector, regardless of its resources, can single-handedly drive significant change on a broad scale. Governments, despite our regulatory power, require the innovation and efficiency of the private sector. Similarly, the private sector benefits immensely from the structured frameworks and policies set by governments. By bridging these divides, partnerships ensure that policies are not only robust and comprehensive, but also pragmatic and implementable. Moreover, Mr. President, partnerships, especially those that include civil society and community organizations, ensure that the transformational process is inclusive and equitable. They serve as a platform for the marginalized voices to be heard and integrated into the national agenda, ensuring that policies cater to the widest demographic possible, including the most vulnerable. This inclusivity is critical for fostering national unity and trust. When various sectors of society feel they are active participants in the transformation process, there's a collective ownership of the outcomes, which is crucial for the sustained success and momentum of any transformation issue. It is only fitting, therefore, that our Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, led the process to revamp the Social Partnership Agreement in 2022. Mr. President, a wide societal cross-section, not limited to the government, parliamentary opposition, civil society, private sector, trade unions, environmentalists, and women organizations, all together and collectively signed the Social Partnership Agreement 2022 to 2026, and it is titled Partnership for Jamaica's Strong and Sustainable Recovery. In that agreement, we all committed to the following words: all partners, in recognizing their individual and collective responsibility to uphold and adhere to each one of the commitments given, resolve to engage in respectful and constructive dialogue and support each other in the fulfillment of these commitments. By accepting constructive feedback and criticism, and by holding each other and the collective partnership accountable in the best long-term interest of the nation. All these partners agreed to that statement. Mr. President, I must emphasize that the National Partnership Council in the 2022 agreement recommitted itself to the best long-term interest of the nation. The members of the National Partnership Council, and they're listed at the end of my speech, and they're very illustrious people, they have committed to the long fight to eradicate crime, corruption, poverty, inefficiency, and bad governance. In the annals of our history, Jamaica has repeatedly shown the world the strength that comes from unity. Our roots, deeply embedded in tales of bravery, diversity, and solidarity, remind us of the endless possibilities when we come together. Mr. President, make no mistake, we are now reaping the fruits of a national partnership that very few living Jamaicans have ever experienced before. We're in the midst of true economic transformation. A stable macroeconomic outlook with historic low unemployment rate of 4.5%, our debt level is now well below pre-pandemic levels, declining more than 30 percentage points. Recently, rating agencies have all upgraded us. Those are important things. Inflation continues its downward trend. Inflation is now at the upper limit of the central bank's target. At 5.9%, inflation is being brought under control. And I should note that most other developed countries cannot say the same thing in their Senate. Furthermore, Mr. President, civil servants and minimum wage earners were granted the largest increase in salaries in modern Jamaica. As a nation united, we faced the challenges of the COVID pandemic and the resulting external shocks. Together, we made the necessary sacrifices. Because of our strong social partnership, we can now collectively enjoy the best economic recovery Jamaica has ever seen. So this was not by accident. This was obviously through the social partnership. Our partnership for safety and security is also yielding some fruit. The Jamaican people are safer today than they were 1 year ago. Up to September 30 of this year, major crimes were down 13% when compared with a similar period for 2022. There have also been decreases in murder and in shooting. Rape and robberies have also declined. Mr. President, the statistics speak, and they speak loudly. Facts have no friends. While the administration and many stakeholders in the fight against crime are not comfortable with where we are now, Mr. President, we do see a shift in the right direction. And Mr. President, I should note that we are working with the partners to revamp our partnership on crime so that we can, all partners, work and have a say in that critical issue that's affecting our country. Mr. President, the National Partnership Council has existed since the mid-2000s in one form or another. It is important to note that successive prime ministers have continued the work and the commitment to social partnership. This has not been one-sided. Both sides of the aisle have shown commitment to the social partnership. This partnership has therefore become an important part of the governance framework of our country. It is therefore important that we start to institutionalize elements of this partnership. In that vein, we're developing a terms of reference for the National Partnership Council, which usually acts as a loose gathering of key interests. We plan to have the draft completed by the end of the financial year. And this TOR will clarify matters such as the frequency of meetings of the Council, which is so important, and its committees, how members are appointed, matters relating to quorum and the scope of the National Partnership Council, which is chaired by the Prime Minister. The National Partnership Agreement 2022 will serve as the basis for the institutionalization of the National Partnership Council. Using the appropriate channels, I will work with all partners to ensure that there is consensus on what the partnership institution should be. Now, as the coordinating minister for the National Partnership Council, I thank all the partners for their ongoing commitment to continuing the work of the partnership. Mr. President, the Andrew Holness-led administration recognizes the role of the National Partnership Council and has committed to strengthening the institution for a better Jamaica. In conclusion, in our rapidly changing world, it is these partnerships that will drive innovation, fuel our economic engines, and help us face challenges, be they environmental, economic, or social. The partners do not always agree. When you have that many people in a room, there's bound to be disagreement. And we definitely have very vigorous discussions. That was the nicest way I could put it. But through it all, it is clear that we all want the best for our country. As the coordinating minister, my commitment remains unwavering to foster an environment where these partnerships flourish, where every voice is valued, and where our shared objectives lead to the betterment of all Jamaicans. As we celebrate National Partnership Day, let's rekindle our commitment to one another. Let's forge ahead, knowing that our collective strength is our greatest asset. Let us embrace the spirit of collaboration, for in unity there is not only strength, but also the promise of a brighter, more prosperous Jamaica for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Announcements?
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Mr. Bond.
I'm trying to use the technology, but you were not paying attention to your monitor.
No, you never come to the class when they were teaching you know how to use it. That is the problem.
I did use it, and I did get tutoring on it. Thank you, Mr. President. And let me say in response to the minister's statement that the opposition has always been strong advocates of the Partnership Council, which various versions have, and the name has been adjusted somewhat over time, but to the concept and the principle, this side has always been strongly supportive. However, Mr. President, I will say that one of the principal vehicles of partnership over the last few years has been the Crime Management and Oversight Committee, CMOC, as it's referred to. And the government effectively withdrew their participation from that committee some time ago. And its meetings and its operations have suffered badly because of that. I welcome the new representative or minister responsible for the partnership approach, or the partnership from the government's perspective. But I would like her to speak specifically to this important partnership initiative. It was, I believe, signed in 2020, and it had gone off to a good start, in my opinion. I am one of the representatives of the opposition on that CMOC. But I would say in the last year plus, Mr. President, the activities have floundered, and largely because the Minister of National Security, who was the initial government representative on that, had withdrawn from the meetings, and no senior member of the government has been participating for quite some time. I know the leadership of CMOC is committed, and they've been having, what should I say, meetings with different stakeholders, trying to re-energize and reactivate the work. And I know I have to pay a tribute to Mr. Lloyd Distant, who has been, passionate and relentless in his personal commitment to ensure that it doesn't fall by the wayside. An important initiative, which crime continues to be foremost in people's mind. And notwithstanding whatever percentage drop relative to last year, which is good, but murders are still way higher than they should be and where they have been in the recent past.
And you're going to ask a question, no doubt.
The question I'm asking is, can the minister tell us what is happening in terms of the government's participation and commitment to CMOC, which is an important structure of partnership, Mr. President? Thank you.
Minister, I think you refer to yourself as the coordinating minister. Could you respond, please? Thank you, Minister Johnson-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that question on CMOC. I think we would all agree that crime is our #1 challenge in Jamaica. And it is important that we have a partnership agreement around crime. And that is the administration's position on it. And I've spent a lot of time since I've become coordinating minister on this particular matter. And there were some issues of, disagreement amongst partners. And there are always going to be disagreements in terms of the crime fight. And there was one particular issue, of course, we know in terms of the SOEs, that was one issue that had been raised by the council. And it is important that when we have disagreements, that we stay at the table and that we continue talking and we get to some level of consensus. And I have been meeting with the CMOC team in our partnership meeting on Wednesday, chaired by our Prime Minister. The issue of CMOC came up, and the issue of having a partnership around crime came up, and there is still commitment towards that. So we think that in the middle, after doing a couple years of CMOC, it's a good time for us to refresh it, look back at it, look at the targets. Are these the right targets? What about the role of the private sector? Because if you look at all of the items that were there, they were all items to be done by the government. But I think you'd also agree that crime cannot be solved only by the government. There's a role for civil society, there's a role for academia, there's also a role for the church. So it is very important in this new refresh where we just look at what were the targets that we had, add a few new targets, and also have some of our partners also have targets so that it's more demonstrable that this is a true partnership around addressing the crime issue. So we're talking, and you mentioned Lloyd Distant, who has worked really hard on this. He and I have had many meetings. We have some scheduled for next week too, to get back at the table. And you would have recalled in the CMOC press conference and in their meetings with various media houses, they noted a percentage. They noted that there were a lot of initiatives that were in train. They also noted the reduction in some of the crime figures, and of course, those are not enough. And so what we want to look at is a refresh of the numbers. Also, many of the items that hadn't moved as quickly were the legislative ones, and you and I know why that happens. Sometimes it can be a little bit slower than we want. But I can tell you that from the government side, we are committed to our partnership on crime, and we are demonstrating that through our discussions with the CMOC team.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Scott Motley.
Thank you, President. Minister, I note that you speak to the fact that there's going to be a partnership agreement 2022, which will serve as a basis for the institutionalization of the National Partnership Council. Prior to this new draft or new agreement, how often had the partnership been meeting? And the selection of the actual members, how was it approached? And are these members presently involved in the restructuring or what appears to me, let me be accurate, to be a restructuring of the partnership agreement?
Thank you, Scott Motley. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In terms of that institutionalization, it's not a deviation from the actual agreement, because in the agreement of 2022, it did state that we would have the partnership institutionalized. So what you see is kind of a loose grouping of different people across Jamaica, and you have different representatives that have been selected. And sometimes it's, you know, the president of the key organizations that are operating in Jamaica. But there is nothing that has been codified in terms of how it is set up, in terms of, for example, the balance of women and men on the council. We've also not determined if there is a new president, does that person automatically come in? What's a quorum for a meeting? So we've been doing this for a long time, since the mid-2000s, but it has always been more loose. What we want to say is we've been able to do this across administrations, which is wonderful. So whoever the prime minister was, whether they were on this side or that side, has seen this as critical. And we believe that it is important to institutionalize it, to have it officially be a part of our governance structure in Jamaica, and also be very definitive about what the Partnership Council does. Do we have to pass policies through the council? And so what we're doing is, through our secretariat, and they're here outside with some displays on National Partnership Day, is to work through a draft. We do have a coordinating committee that meets, which is a smaller body of the National Partnership Council, and it is through that group that we will work on the TOR, and that will be taken to the broader council. And of course, we know at a council, each of the individuals will have to take it to their particular groups in order to get comments. And that's why I say, you know, the end of the financial year, because we do need to have time for dialogue amongst a lot of people before we can do it. But the key thing is, we want this to be a part of our governance process going forward, irrespective of which side is there.
Thank you, Minister. Madam Clerk, announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following: the Independent Commission of Investigations quarterly report for the period April to June 2023, entitled A Review of Deaths in Custody in JCF Lockups for 2021-2022. The 27th Annual Report on Audited Financial Statements of the Jamaica Social Investment Fund for the financial year 2022-2023. The Provisional Collection of Tax, General Consumption Tax, Amendment of Schedules Order 2023, Confirmation Resolution under the Provisional Collection of Tax Act. The Jamaica Gazette Proclamation Rules and Regulations, the Provisional Collection of Tax, General Consumption Tax, Amendment of Schedules Order 2023, Volume 146, dated Tuesday, August 8, 2023, under the Provisional Collection of Tax Act. And for information, the resolution of the Honorable House of Representatives regarding the Cuban embargo. The Auditor General's Department certified appropriation accounts for head 20,000 and 20,000 C for the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service for the year 2019-2020. Head 15,010 Jamaica Information Service for the year 2020-2021. The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development measures under the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017 in respect of 1, the Mount Salem community and environs in the parish of St. James Zone, 2, the Augustown Zone, 3, the Norwood community in the parish of St. James Zone 4, the Denham Town Community Zone. 5, the Greenwich Town Zone. 6, the Parade Gardens Zone. And 7, the Savannah Lamar Zone. Extension of period of operation number 5, Order 2023, and their resolutions and their respective ministry papers and resolutions numbered 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, and 101 of 2023. Social intervention updates for July 13, 2023 to October 18, 2023, dated October 18, 2023.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. To the Honorable Senate, I have the honor to advise the Honorable Senate that on the 24th day of October 2023, the House of Representatives agreed to the Senate amendments to the bills entitled 1, an act to repeal and replace the Bail Act and to provide for connected matters, and 2, an act to amend the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act. Signed, Juliet Holness, MP, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Thank you, Madam. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the Senate, motions for leave to introduce bills, the presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained, public business. Minister Johnson-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is our intention today to take the Public Procurement Registration and Classification of Suppliers Amendment Regulations 2023, of which notice was given in July of this year prior to the summer recess, and then to proceed with the continuation of the State of the Nation debate with contributions from Senator Golding Campbell and Senator Allen in that order. As the technical team is here and as the regulations are fairly uncontroversial, Mr. President, it's proposed to proceed with that first, to dispatch with that, and then proceed with the State of the Nation debate. With your leave, Mr. President, it is proposed that we note that the regulations before us, it's fine. The regulations before us seek to amend Part 1 of the second schedule of the Public Procurement Registration and Classification of Suppliers Regulations 2019, which I'll refer to, of course, as the principal regulations. And fundamentally, they're intended to increase the registration fees associated with the maximum registration period of 3 years in accordance with Regulation 9 of the principal regulations. So colleagues, of course, in this Honorable Senate would recall that the public procurement framework is underpinned by a suite of legislation grounded in the Public Procurement Act of 2015, which actually came into operation on April 1st, 2019. And the object of this act, of course, and its regulations are grounded, or seek rather, to promote fairness and public confidence in the procurement process as a part of fostering national growth and development in a sustainable and inclusive manner. Mr. President, the Act, Section 9, in fact, establishes the Public Procurement Commission, which has the responsibility to, among other things, promote fairness, transparency, and equity in the registration of persons, firms, and entities under the Act, and the award of procurement contracts. Section 11 gives the Commission the power to register and classify persons, firms or entities, of course, as suppliers. And the registration process is intended to ensure that suppliers are eligible to participate in the procurement process and that they meet technical requirements financial requirements, and legal capacity that is prescribed in each category of registration. So there's a due diligence process which is associated with the registration of suppliers. And this includes examination of their assets, their business, product, services, prior projects, as well as the review of financial information. And Section 61 enables the Commission, with the approval of the Minister, to make regulations prescribing, among other things, the forms, fees, and content and form of registers. Mr. President, Regulation 10 provides that on notification by the Commission that the supplier's application has been successful, a fee is payable in respect of the grade in which the supplier has been classified in the first column of Part 1 of the second schedule, and these fees are applicable only to suppliers registering in the works suppliers grades. And Regulation 9 provides for a maximum period of validity of registration of 3 years, so it's a period up to. The practice has been to register contractors or register grant certificates of registration for a period of 1.5 years. And then the supplier, of course, may elect to return to the register by resubmitting a new application and paying fees. But looking at the cost and the inefficiency, which is part of this registration process, the Commission intended to move, or intends to move, to the upper end of the period for 3 years. But it does not wish to do so for clear reasons at the current fees, given that there are, in fact, administrative and other costs that are apart, that are associated with each application. And the current fees are, which I will get to shortly, and they're set out in the regulations resolution, which admittedly was tabled some time ago, so you may not have gone through your files, but you have them. Have them. So they've been done up to, they've been generally granted at 1.5 years, and the aim is to go to 3 years to deal with commensurate application and administration costs. It's anticipated that this will encourage a larger pool of suppliers, because companies and even small contractors may not be interested in the bureaucracy of this process every 1.5 years. It's anticipated that a 3-year registration period will allow for a wider pool of suppliers to come into the government procurement process. And it is also thought that, as there's no proposal to increase the fees at the micro level, and then any of the nominal supporting fees, then it is anticipated that this will not have any negative impact on the smaller enterprises seeking to participate in the government procurement process. So essentially, grade 1 suppliers will move from 60,000 to 120. The grade 2 suppliers will also move from 30 to 60. Grade 4 will move from 5 to 10. And grade 5, which is largely artisans, will move from $1,000 to $2,000. So it is anticipated, grade 2 is 30 to 60. So it's doubling. So it's moving from a maximum of 1.5 years to 3 years, and the fees are doubled proportionately. Mm, 60 to 120 for grades. No, it's my error. 60 to 120 for grades 1 and 2, 30 to 60 for 3, 5 to 10 for 4, and 1 to 2 for 5. I jumped a line. My apologies. Thank you for the call, for the good call on that, so that the record is consistent with what is before us. So it is anticipated that in the clause by clause, Mr. President, that there will be no cause for lengthy debate, as Clause 1 simply sets out the title, which has already been read. Clause 2 sets out the Part 1 of the second schedule, again, only with the fees for works, which are being amended. And having already identified the obvious benefits and efficiencies to be gained, Mr. President, these are now commended to this chamber for the contribution of both sides. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. President. The matter is uncontroversial, and I only really have one question of clarification, if you have the information. I thought it curious that registration fees only apply to works. I'm assuming that's contractors, civil works type contracts. But it's nil for goods and services. You know, contracts for supply of goods and services can be of substantial amounts, and I think it also requires the Procurement Commission to do some due diligence on those suppliers as well. So I'm just curious as to why those are nil, as opposed to even a small artisan, who I assume in this case would be a mason or a carpenter or some electrician, is required to pay a fee, but not, say, a senior counsel who might be supplying legal services, who could much more afford to pay a registration fee. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bunting. Minister?
If you could give me a minute to just confer, because I have a theory, but I would rather not state the theory.
I'm sorry, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, so the technical answer is that this has been the practice. What I will say is that legal and cultural services are exempt generally from the procurement process, as we know, as part of the practice at the convention. I can inquire why. I still am not going to state my theory, but it could be another source of revenue. And therefore, I will raise with the relevant minister that this matter has been placed on the table as a question in the Senate without unduly delaying our consideration of the matter. I will inquire why it is that we're not seeking registration fees from goods suppliers as well. So, Mr. President, it does appear that there are no further contributions, and I therefore ask that the resolution be affirmed.
Members would have heard the presentation of the Honorable Minister and subsequent debate. And I now ask that the motion be approved. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Thank you. Minister?
It is now intended to continue with the State of the Nation debate. We're all going through the process, Mr. President. Some, as you have seen earlier, would be forgiving of you. It is now intended to invite the presenters who will address us on their perspectives of the State of the Nation. Mr. President, the Honorable Senator, the Honorable Sherene Golding Campbell will be our first presenter.
Senator Golding Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Is it better to use this one?
Yes, I think that's a better one. Yes, on the right-hand side. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to my colleagues. Mr. President, this is an overdue presentation. And so overdue it is that I lost members of the family who were present on the first occasion, who haven't been able to come on this occasion. But I want to recognize my stepson, Adam, who is here with me. He's the sole representative of the children today. Mr. President, on September 15th, 2020, I took my oath of office on appointment as senator in this honorable Senate. I'm grateful to the Most Honorable Prime Minister Andrew Holness for this appointment and for affording me what I consider one of the highest forms of national service behind military service, that of serving my country as a member of the Houses of Parliament. I was then, and today continue to be, humbled by the opportunity to serve my fellow Jamaicans and my country. And my prayer every day, Mr. President, is that I do so credibly and in the interest of my fellow citizens. Mr. President, I crave your indulgence as I make a few acknowledgements before launching into the meat of my presentation. I did recognize my stepson, Adam, but I must thank my wider family for their unwavering support. As a working wife and mother, this endeavor of service, coupled with my vocation as an attorney at law, often takes me away from family with long hours at my desk, beyond what they may have expected, and certainly at times than they wish to tolerate. I'm grateful that despite my unavailability, they still give me the room to serve my country. I give thanks also, Mr. President, to my familial antecedents in the Houses of Parliament and in public office. My father, my grandfathers, my gaga, my paternal grandmother, my Uncle Pernell and Uncle Rocky, my Uncle Tony and Auntie Icy, all of whom have run for political office in some form or other. Mr. President, I want to say a big thank you to my team at my law office, Golding, Campbell and Associates, all of whom are here with me this morning. They are an amazing group of lady lawyers, and they keep the lights on, and they continue the work despite my absence at times in pursuit of parliamentary duties. We're very balanced. I'm grateful for their encouragement and feedback on many aspects of my work here in the Senate, and I'm privileged to have them in my circle. I want to publicly recognize them by name. Yetunde, Ane, Denise is not here with us today, Agesha, Anne-Marie, our interns Kelsey, who is not here, and Shane. Thank you all so much. Mr. President, I must also thank the clerk to the Houses of Parliament and the parliamentary staff, and particularly to Mr. President, the parliamentary librarians and the team in the Hansard department, who are quick to respond to my request for research assistance and documents to assist my preparation for the various committee assignments. And they really, really are very responsive. I thank you all so much. I can't leave out my Senate colleagues on both sides of the aisle who have been collaborative and supportive. And I thank you also, Mr. President, for your guidance and advice along the way and your ever-present availability whenever I have called on you for that guidance and advice.
You're welcome.
Seems like I should have said that a long time ago. I want to especially acknowledge my leader of government business, from whom I have learned so much these past 3 years. And it's not just the energy and commitment with which she tackles her portfolio and leads the government side, but perhaps most poignant for me is her management of our sometimes robust debates, and you can put in brackets, and her management of me. I'm grateful to her for allowing all views to contend. It's a mark of inclusive leadership, Mr. President, and I'm grateful to her for that approach. That approach, Mr. President, is consistent with the approach of the Andrew Holness-led administration. Inclusiveness reigns, and efforts are made always to ensure that even in the nooks and the crannies of building our prosperity, no one is left behind. Mr. President, despite our youthfulness as a nation, today we stand at an exciting and pivotal time in our evolution. Prime Minister Holness was first given his mandate in February 2016 at a challenging time. Since then, Mr. President, under his leadership, lofty goals were set and significant strides were made. Harken your mind back to where we were in February 2016 when the administration took over. We had an economy then, Mr. President, that recorded a mere 1.4% growth rate between 2015 and 16. Those kinds of numbers were reminiscent of a period in the 90s when we had trickling or no growth and sometimes even negative growth. Our debt to GDP ratio stood at approximately 124% for the 2015-16 fiscal year. Simply put, Mr. President, we were spending more than we were earning, and we were still in a situation, too, where our people were continuing to make great sacrifices under the public sector wage freeze, a consequence of the restructuring IMF agreement. It was then, Mr. President, a bitter pill, which we had to swallow to undo the pervasive damage of the 1990s and 18 years of some misguided policies. But thankfully, Mr. President, with foresight and vision, Prime Minister Holness and his team set off with some bold moves. Removed income tax for persons earning up to $1.5 million. Cut GCT from 16.5% to 15%. Increased the GCT threshold for businesses from $3 million to $10 million. Abolished the minimum business tax and asset tax so that micro and small enterprises could have an ease to really concentrate their efforts on growth. Stamp duty of 4% per value of real estate transactions was abolished and replaced by a flat fee of $5,000 no matter the value of the transaction. Mr. President, I'm going back in the 7-year history of the administration because, when we come to judge our government, we must do so objectively. We have to be careful not to get drawn into propaganda and hype and baseless criticisms and even fake news. I'm going back in the history, Mr. President, to paint a picture of what I consider a government that has been people-centric. Initiatives like the lowering of consumption tax and increase in income tax threshold hit the bottom line of every single Jamaican citizen. These are not simply tick-the-box economic indicators. They are real initiatives that were implemented by this administration to improve the lives of all of us on this rock. Fast forward to September 2020, Mr. President, when Prime Minister Holness was given an overwhelming mandate to continue his vision for our country for the second consecutive term. Recall, we were smack in the middle of a global pandemic. I don't know how many of you remember the fear, because after you pass through a moment, sometimes you don't remember that you were so afraid at the beginning of it. The fear and the anxiety that we felt as we watched the coronavirus wipe out the lives of our loved ones and bring businesses across so many sectors to a grinding halt. It was a daunting time for our nation and for this administration, whose lofty goals were threatened by the conditions that came with the COVID-19 pandemic. School closures caused us to pivot to remote learning. Some of our kids were unable to participate. They didn't have devices, they didn't have internet access. Our borders had just been reopened with restrictions to ensure that the transmission of the virus was kept at a minimum, and we were under movement restrictions to limit that transition and to minimize the rate at which our hospitals and health centers were being overwhelmed. Our tourism sector was hit massively because of the border closures, and we were trying to pivot to open back the tourism sector while doing so safely and responsibly. Job losses and layoffs, business closures as markets shut down. Mr. President, we were all there, so we know. So when we seek to judge an administration, we have to do it objectively. we must recall the state of affairs as they were when we are making judgment and be objective about how we measure our government, not getting drawn into propaganda and hype. The fact of the matter is that Jamaica, because of the leadership it had, was able to move past the COVID-19 pandemic in much better form than many other countries. Our Prime Minister and his team did that, getting us quickly back on track to be able to pursue the lofty goals the administration had set. Mr. President, even with the impact of COVID-19, Prime Minister Holness reported to us in March of 2023 that over 50,000 of the 70,000 housing units promised in 2020 were in train, whether completed, under construction, in negotiations, budgeted, or in planning and design phase, and him still have 2 more years. Even with the challenges caused by COVID-19, the government's promise of public sector compensation reform was realized, and the most massive increase in salaries in the history of our country was implemented this year. It was a promise in 2020, and in 2023 that promise was kept. So when we judge our government, we must do it objectively. We must consider all the circumstances, and we mustn't get caught up in the hype and the propaganda. Mr. President, the government met and continues to meet its promise of providing improved training opportunities to increase the employability of our citizens. The abolition of fees up to the associate degree level at heart is one such initiative, and it's no wonder, Mr. President, that our country is recording the lowest rates of unemployment in our history. Despite COVID-19, the promise of the government to expand and build out infrastructure, highways, etc., has been met, and work is advanced in expanding our highway networks despite the teething pains associated with construction. Mr. President, when you're going to judge this government, you are compelled to be objective. You are compelled to not listen to the propaganda and hype that is perpetrated, because the results are evident. Mr. President, it's never an easy road. There are so many never-before moments of national achievement which have been realized under this administration. We're no longer at 2016's 124% debt to GDP ratio. Today, we earn more than we spend. That's new for us. Mr. President, I felt it necessary to remind us of the historical background, because I do recognize a restiveness among our people that leads me to think we are forgetting where we are coming from. Change is hard. Change is painful sometimes. But change is necessary to ensure that our people are able to position themselves to reach their full potential. The building of prosperity, Mr. President, is not an easy task. Construction is a messy endeavor. There is construction dust, there is noise and discomfort, and especially if you have to live in the building while you're building, it is misery. But we have gotten through the COVID-19 pandemic, and the job of our government today is to ensure that while building prosperity, that everyone is included, and that even in the nooks and the crannies of the construction site, no one is left behind. To that end, Mr. President, the Andrew Holness-led administration has recognized that building prosperity cannot happen without due regard for the state of our women folk and the system set up to nurture and support their development and growth. Mr. President, the Prime Minister has been groundbreaking in his commitment to ensuring that our women folk are supported and enabled to make the contribution to national development that they have been seeking to make. This administration, Mr. President, has been deliberate in ensuring the participation of women in our national programs and priorities. A minimum of 30% of all public boards must now be filled by women. The enablement of the participation of women in the governance and leadership structure of our country endures to the benefit of all of us, Mr. President. And our Prime Minister has demonstrated his commitment to that by ensuring that significant numbers of female candidates were offered to the electorate in the last election, and that women's representation at the level of the cabinet is increased. Mr. President, in an effort to have regard to the nooks and crannies, the places where we overlook the work that must be done to ensure the building of prosperity, I raise with you the percentage of population of women, 50.5%. They make up 46.5% of the labor force and 45.7% of the employed labor force. So, walk with me a little bit here. Suppose I was to propose in this Senate that all women be given 36 to 60 days of unpaid leave every single year, or maybe even paid leave. I suspect everyone here would be gasping. What do you think would be the fallout of giving women 2 months unpaid leave per year? I suspect the Employers' Federation would be up in arms, and as an employer, I can appreciate that perspective as well. Mr. President, I think I have to warn you that I'm getting into what some might find an uncomfortable conversation, but I'm not making any apology for it. Because in the building of prosperity, we have to deal with matters that we might find uncomfortable. Mr. President, in 2023, we still have women who must opt out of productive life because of the inability to afford a most basic and necessary component essential to their productivity. And I'm talking here, Mr. President, about the women and girls in our country who are enduring period poverty. What does that mean? The United Nations Fund for Population Activities describes period poverty as the struggle many low-income women and girls face while trying to afford menstrual products. The term also refers to the increased economic vulnerability that they face due to the financial burden posed by the supplies. These include not only the menstrual pads and tampons, but also related costs such as pain medication, and believe it or not, something as simple as underwear. Mr. President, a check of just 3 major supermarkets indicated that at the low end, period products can cost anywhere from $200 per pack of 10 to $500. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists recommend changing sanitary material every 4 to 8 hours. I don't know if our medical association has a recommendation on that score. I was unable to find that information. But of course, how many packs of 10 a woman needs in each cycle, each monthly cycle, will depend on how heavy her flow is, how absorbent the material is, and it can last 3 to 5 days. We're talking about 3 to 5 days on average each month. Mr. President, I'm willing to bet you never thought in your tenure as president you'd be listening to a presentation talking about women's periods. But this is one of the things that in the building of prosperity I'm calling us to take account of, because it is easy to unintentionally overlook these issues. It's not just an issue of affordability, Mr. President. It's an issue of reproductive health and an issue of basic human dignity. Without access to menstrual supplies, girls may resort to using toilet paper, dirty rags, leaves. There are accounts of girls using banana leaves, or even using a sanitary pad for more than 1 day, which is not recommended, Mr. President. This can cause infections and other medical issues. If our women don't have access to clean water, the situation can be further exacerbated, making it difficult for them to hygienically manage their periods. Thankfully, Minister Samuda is working hard to make the issue of lack of access to water a distant memory, and I have my money betting on him. Mr. President, the Global Development Commons was launched during the 75th United Nations General Assembly in September 2020. The GDC is an open access digital platform to crowdsource evidence and innovations to support the child-focused sustainable development goals. It's a digital space for discussion and problem solving, and it's accessible publicly and across sectors. If you take a look at the GDC, you will see reports that period poverty can negatively affect mental health, with women who suffer from period poverty being more likely to report moderate to severe depression. Teen girls in particular may also feel isolated and lonely if they can't talk to anyone about what they're experiencing, especially at a time when they're likely to be heavily influenced by the opinions of their peers. Mr. President, the reality of period poverty is not just a Jamaican problem. It exists in developing countries and also too in developed countries. Some countries have taken steps to remove consumption tax from sanitary products. Thankfully, and I recognize and give credit to the Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller, Jamaica did this some time ago, exempting sanitary products from GCT. But, Mr. President, there are still other duties and fees that apply, which include import duties of 20%, a standard compliance fee of 0.3%, and an environmental levy of 0.5%, and as well a customs administration fee. So the cost of the product includes at least, before you do any markup, a 20.8% increase in the cost. The fact is that the vast majority of sanitary products are imported. Very few are made here in Jamaica. And while the quality made here in Jamaica is excellent, the cost is higher than the imported brands. Mr. President, whether these fees can be removed is an assessment that must be undertaken by the Ministry of Finance, and I implore the Minister, for whom I have the greatest regard, for his competence and his people-centric consciousness, to take a look at how we can best make these products as affordable as possible. There are various ways, Mr. President, to ensure an end to period poverty. If you can imagine that women and girls who are PATH beneficiaries and on the school feeding program are unable to afford school lunches and breakfast, then you can imagine that ending period poverty may very well be something that can be fixed under the PATH program. Certainly, access to period products could possibly be funded and delivered through the distributive network of the PATH program. But there are other mechanisms that may support reaching the women and girls affected by period poverty. For instance, the National Health Fund, which was established, among other things, to provide prescribed health benefits to all residents, regardless of age, gender, health, or economic status, to make pharmaceutical and medical supplies accessible and available to government-owned health facilities, and importantly, to secure improvement in the productivity of residents by reducing time lost on the job that is attributable to personal and family health care problems. Well, a period is not a disease. It is something which, if not dealt with in a hygienic manner, may lead to disease, and certainly can lead to loss of productivity for those women unable to afford sanitary products to deal with monthly periods and absent themselves from work. The NHF, with its network of provider pharmacies and public pharmacies, may well be placed to ensure the distribution of period products to our vulnerable women and girls. And I ask, Mr. President, that in the appropriate places, consideration be given to how we can achieve this. Mr. President, I make no definitive recommendation because more needs to be understood in terms of how many of our women and girls are impacted. I want to recognize at this juncture, Mr. President, the Her Flow Foundation, which was founded by Ms. Shelly-Ann Weeks, and Shelly-Ann is in the gallery. Shelly-Ann, just wave so we can recognize you. Thank you. She's probably the most seminal person in Jamaica at the forefront of tackling this problem. She has, with her own time and resources and the support of kind partners, driven the length and breadth of Jamaica, delivering period products to girls in schools from Morant Point to Negril Point. She's a Jamaican patriot, Mr. President, and I want to recognize her and thank her for her service. Mr. President, the Herflow Foundation conducted an informal survey in high schools throughout the length and breadth of Jamaica and uncovered that up to 44% of first formers are affected by period poverty. The survey also confirmed that some of them stay home while on their period, some ask the guidance counselor or other teachers for products, and still some resort to using alternatives like old cloths and banana leaves. Yeah, we are in 2023, and yeah, this is happening right here. So we need a study to determine how many working women may also be affected. It's not an affordability issue, it's a reproductive health issue. We have to be careful about how we contextualize it. It's not beyond us, Mr. President, and certainly it's in our collective interest to ensure that no girl or woman in Jamaica is without the necessary materials to go through menstruation without having to lose productive work time and attendance at school. Remember, Mr. President, I had asked initially if we'd be prepared to give women 60 days of unpaid or paid leave. And I am answering the question, no, it's not in our interest, Mr. President, to lose the participation of our women for 3 to 5 days each month. What can amount to 2 months per year? It's a level of productivity we can ill afford. We must ensure that the 45% of our workforce that contribute to our national economy are not affected by period poverty and are able to fully participate in work and school and avoid the loss of potentially 2 months of absence that may currently be faced when there's an inability to afford the cost of sanitary products. It's my intention, Mr. President, to put this matter to the bicameral caucus of women parliamentarians when it meets. It's a national imperative. It's not a nice to have, it's a need to have. A study of the measure of the loss of productivity that we experience from this reality needs to be undertaken. And I'm confident, Mr. President, that having raised this issue, that our government will take a look at how we can address it as we move towards building prosperity. Mr. President, I want to turn now to a nook and cranny issue that I have uncovered in my look at how we're building prosperity. And I'm sorry that my colleague, Senator Lambert Brown, is not present today. I suspect he might be listening. Hi, Lamy. My firm concentrates its practice in commercial law, the law business of business. We advise companies and individuals. We advise companies and individuals in commercial transactions, and so we're in close contact with the entrepreneurial segment of the society and the needs that they have and the challenges that they face. And for that reason, we have had a front row seat to observe some of the difficulties that MSMEs in particular have faced with the existing arrangements for resolving labor disputes. Mr. President, I raise this issue because much effort has been made by this administration to clear the roadblocks for businesses to grow and to thrive. Organizations like the Jamaica Business Development Corporation, the Exim Bank, the Development Bank, work assiduously to ensure that businesses are able to obtain training support to prepare themselves for investment in their business, gain access to financing, and find markets for their goods and services, whether local or overseas. Our business minister wants to hear about the overseas market and the export. Initiatives which I mentioned before, like the removal of the minimum business tax and asset tax, and increasing the GCT threshold and others, demonstrate the government's commitment to supporting the growth of businesses and MSMEs. But this nook and cranny issue, Mr. President, appears to be hampering businesses. And it has to do with the labor component and how the disputes are dealt with, particularly in the MSME context. When workers and employers have a dispute, Mr. President, about the termination of the employee or other disciplinary action that is taken by an employer in respect of the worker, there are specific steps that must be taken under law to settle or adjudicate the disputes. Prior to 2010, these types of disputes were referred to the Industrial Disputes Tribunal, the IDT, but only where the worker was a member of a union. It left the non-unionized worker without recourse to the IDT and with the prospect of solving these disputes through the more expensive process of the courts. In 2010, the then JLP administration took the bold step of amending the Labor Relations and Industrial Disputes Act to permit non-unionized workers to have their disputes in respect of 3 categories heard by the IDT. And those categories were the physical conditions in which they work, the termination or suspension of the employment of the worker, and any matter affecting the rights and duties of the employer or organization representing employers, or of any worker or the organization representing workers. So if you look at the debate which ensued in the Senate in February of 2010 when the amendments were passed, it's clear that the amendments were limited to the categories of disputes that I've just mentioned. And that's so for a good reason. The reasons then elucidated by Senator Dwight Nelson of blessed memory, who championed the bill, were to provide the non-unionized worker who has a complaint or grievance access to the IDT as the public arbitration mechanism for the adjudication of these types of disputes, to facilitate the referral of disputes in respect of non-unionized workers without the requirement that an impending industrial dispute exists or is contemplated, and to recognize that there are a higher number of non-unionized workers in the workforce than there are unionized workers. So it was to remove any disenfranchisement of those non-unionized workers from access to the IDT. But the reason that I want to highlight, Mr. President, at the time, Senator Nelson recorded that one of the reasons was to accord respect to the right to freedom of contract between worker and employer. That is why, Mr. President, only the disputes of rights, meaning the disputes to do with termination, suspension, physical conditions, were permitted to be referred. So in other words, matters that related to the freedom of contract, like size of wages, compensation, benefits, that kind of thing, those were not included as matters that could be referred. Mr. President, 2010 amendments were a good idea, I've given this background to them because I want to discuss a consequence of the amendments that I don't believe.
Senator Bonten.
Mr. President, the Senator's time for speaking having expired, I'm moving that it be extended by time sufficient to complete her presentation.
Thank you. Members would have heard the question. In favor? Aye. Thank you. Senator Golden Campbell.
Thank you, Senator Bonten. Thank you to my colleagues. I always pride myself that when I ever get up to stand in this chamber, I am always within my time. I probably should have apologized to you before I began because I know I'm not going to be in my time today. But it's been 3 years, so give me a little room. Thank you. Mr. President, the consequence of the amendments that I want to put to the Senate today is that non-unionized workers now access the IDT when they have a dispute with their employer. But, Mr. President, when the parties get to the IDT to have the dispute heard, the IDT has to have regard to the labor code. And the specific language at Section 3 of the Labor Relations and Industrial Disputes Act is a failure on the part of any person to observe any provision of a labor code, which is for the time being in operation, shall not itself render him liable to proceedings, but in any proceedings before the tribunal or a board, any provision of such code which appears to the tribunal or board to be relevant to any question arising in the proceedings shall be taken into account by the tribunal or board in determining the question. So the IDT, when employee and employer come to resolve their disputes about the termination or the suspension, looks at the procedures for doing that had been laid out in the labor code. The Labour Code was approved by the Houses of Parliament in 1976, shortly after the passage of the Employment Termination and Redundancy Act in 74 and the Labour Relations and Industrial Dispute Act in 75. Then, Mr. President, the central focus of the Labour Relations and Industrial Dispute regime was to ensure that workers' rights to collective bargaining and association with a union of their choice was respected and grounded in law. Accordingly, the supportive legislative framework was designed in that collective bargaining context, where workers through their union representatives could sit at the table with employers to hammer out the processes and procedures that they would then agree would form part of the terms and conditions of employment. The Labour Code was established then as a set of guidelines to promote good labour relations and establish best practices for the relationship between the unionized employee and the employer. It was not contemplated that it would govern the relationship between the non-unionized worker and, in particular, confine employers and employees and non-unionized employees to the guidelines set out in the Labour Code, particularly in relation to grievance and disciplinary procedures. And it's important too, Mr. President, to recognize that since 1976, though we have made several amendments to the labour laws, the code hasn't been revised. So the vast majority of disputes now coming before the IDT involve non-unionized workers, not unionized workers. The non-unionized workers, the ones for whom the Labour Code was not created, not intended at the time. Mr. President, if you look back at that 2010 debate, when Senator Nelson articulated the policy behind the amendments, you won't find any mention of the issue of the application of the Labour Code to non-unionized workers. The main focus of those amendments was granting access to the IDT. So what is happening in practice, Mr. President, is that resolving disputes on suspension and dismissal issues are proving unfairly burdensome and costly to businesses, most of whom, since the amendments in 2010, were unaware that they were subjected to the requirements of the Labour Code, and they normally don't know this until a dispute is referred to the IDT. Mr. President, it's an issue that has fallen in the nooks and crannies, and it requires that we not only have regard to the rights of workers, but also to the ability of the very businesses that we expect to propel our economy forward to be able to do business in a pragmatic and cost-efficient way. It's not consistent, I don't think, because it wasn't intentional. And it's not consistent with the policy of this administration for it to be harder for MSMEs to do business rather than easier. Mr. President, the grievance procedures set out in the code and which the IDT is bound to take account of in determining any question before it require employers to adopt written procedures for settlement of grievances, setting out things like the level at which an issue should first be raised, time limits for resolution of the dispute, multiple stages that the grievance must be escalated to where unresolved, like the immediate supervisor first and then the department head and then the higher management before referral to the Ministry of Labour for conciliation. The code also sets out that disciplinary procedures should be in writing and set out who has authority to take various forms of disciplinary action and ensure that supervisors do not have the authority to dismiss without reference to more senior management. It requires workers must be given the right to a representative and a right of appeal to a level of management not previously involved in the dispute. The code further subjects the non-unionized employment relationship to a requirement for oral warnings and specifies that a first breach, except in the case of gross misconduct, should not be treated as a terminable breach. Mr. President, MSMEs don't fit within the strictures of the Labour Code. It's not hard to see that these kinds of strictures are not practical for MSMEs, and yet, currently, they are being applied in disciplinary matters with non-unionized employees by the IDT. Furthermore, Mr. President, the guidelines of the code apply in the non-unionized context, no matter the size of the business. So an employer is defined in the Labor Relations Industrial Disputes Act as a person for whom one or more workers work. So a company with less than 5 staff members, where a single person may in fact be the supervisor, the department head, and the senior management, is subject to the guidelines under the code, which contemplate levels of hierarchy that just don't exist in their context. Mr. President, I used 2 examples of businesses that have incurred disproportionate costs in going through the adjudication process outlined in the code. In one case, a business with about 60 employees and no formal HR department repeatedly warned the employee of a particular infraction until he received a final warning that he would be dismissed if he committed the infraction again. He did, and he was dismissed. But without the structured hearing procedures required by the Labor Code. The employee referred the matter to the IDT, to the Ministry of Labor, and threatened to take the matter to the IDT. The company was advised to settle, given the likelihood of the manner in which the IDT would apply the Labor Code and the failure of the company to engage in the structured hearing procedures of the Code. That company, Mr. President, incurred costs of over $2 million, inclusive of legal fees, salary payments to the employee from the time of dismissal to the time of settlement, and lost time for work for staff who participated in the process of settlement. And that's just for one employee. In another case, Mr. President, in an effort to comply with the Labor Code, the company incurred a cost of over $3 million. This includes the legal fees, the cost of setting aside accommodation for this independent panel hearing, lost time at work, acquiring the independent persons to sit on the internal disciplinary panel to hear the matter. Mr. President, the Labor Code doesn't contemplate the internal mechanisms of the MSMEs. It assumes a complex HR structure that small businesses just do not have. And it was never intended to apply in the situation of non-unionized workers and employers, where the freedom to contract is paramount. Mr. President, if it were simply a set of guidelines that employers, when dealing with disciplinary issues with non-unionized workers, could choose to adopt or not, then the issue wouldn't arise. But it is not a set of guidelines. Indeed, in the seminal case of Jamaica Flour Mills and the IDT and NWU, National Workers Union, which went all the way to the Privy Council, the 2003 decision of the Privy Council affirmed how the IDT itself had treated with the application of the Labor Code in determining the dispute. In determining that the workers in that case had in fact been unjustifiably dismissed, the IDT had said the code is as near to law as you can get. The Labor Code since this decision and others before it, Mr. President, has in fact given the Labor Code, this decision, Mr. President, and others before it, have in fact given the Labor Code more than the status of guidelines. It is essentially law. Ensuring MSMEs are not left behind, Mr. President, is an important imperative. It's a nook and cranny issue in light of the thrust of this administration to ensure the ease of doing business and facilitate the growth of MSMEs. The time is ripe to correct this anomaly. We must move to ensure that employers and businesses are able to operate business systems that are practical and pragmatic and allow for the ease of doing business that we continue to aspire to. To that end, Mr. President, I believe it is appropriate for us now to give consideration to exempting the settlement of disputes involving non-unionized workers from the mandatory application of the Labor Code. But it is not to say that businesses must be allowed to apply unfair disciplinary processes devoid of natural justice. What I am proposing, Mr. President, is that where parties go before the IDT to settle disputes in the context of non-unionized workers, that they be allowed to apply the rules that exist within the business for the settlement of disputes. Rules, Mr. President, which would have been previously agreed between the worker and the employer at the time of contract or commencement of employment. Rules that allow for businesses to create disciplinary systems that are practical for their size and human resource structures and consistent with their revenue position. Rules, Mr. President, that both employers and workers can agree are fair and provide protections to both. These rules, Mr. President, can then be applied by the IDT when a non-unionized worker and employer come before the IDT because they've been unable to resolve their dispute. So what we would be doing is giving businesses and non-unionized employers the freedom to determine their own disciplinary procedures and processes and requiring the IDT to have regard to those procedures and not to the labor code, which didn't contemplate the scenario. Mr. President, I want to be clear. I am not advocating for non-unionized workers to be left to the mercy of individual employers without any guidelines at all. I share the concern that some may have that negotiations between employer and non-unionized worker will never be on an even footing. And I'm not promoting a situation where employers are able to craft procedures that are harsh and unfair and imbalanced. We may indeed need to craft some statutory guidelines that are applicable to businesses and non-unionized workers. But those guidelines, Mr. President, should not be as restrictive or impractical for MSMEs as the labor code currently is. I want to be careful too, and I want to be responsible in raising this issue because so often our discussions about labor are riddled with emotion. I don't want at any point for it to be interpreted that I'm positioning against trade unions or against workers. Trade unions have been pivotal in ensuring the rights of workers and the terms and conditions under which they engage work. They have had an important role to play in transitioning us from our colonial past, where the rights of workers were subordinated to that of employers, to embracing labor markets in a context where we appreciate the value of the contribution of workers to the productivity of our commercial endeavors. Workers are essential to the growth of MSMEs, but if we make it harder for businesses to make decisions about their work processes, if we continue to deny the freedom of employers and non-unionized workers to agree the disciplinary rules and processes that must govern the employment contract, if we deny employers a reasonable ability to discipline employees who run afoul of their agreed requirements, then we are creating a disincentive to do business. We are assigning a burden that was not intended. Some further work is necessary, Mr. President. In building prosperity for all our people, we must have regard for the nooks and crannies so that, as this administration has promised, no one is left behind. Mr. President, before I move from this topic to my last substantive topic, I want to mention an incidental issue. It's also a nook and cranny issue, because you see, while the IDT hears these disputes that I'm talking about, another problem that arises is the difficulty of monitoring their awards in an effort to observe the trends and the mindset of the tribunal in the various matters dealing with the various claims. The IDT has no independent website that you can access and research the awards that are made. If you want to research the rulings of the IDT, you have to attend at the location and visit the registry. And then somebody will show you the files that contain the awards, which are not catalogued according to subject matter. You have to go through 1978, 1979, and you have to look for a case, turn the pages, and find a case that is applicable to the issue you're seeking to research. Mr. President, we need easy access to these awards so that all of us business employees, parliamentarians, lawyers, and the public can monitor how the IDT is interpreting the relevant legislation and the labor code so that we can take the necessary corrective legislative action when required, and so that we can learn from the awards and improve our employment practices. It's a nook and cranny issue, Mr. President. We could go on just like this, or we can improve the process of access to the awards of the IDT so that we all benefit and we all improve on this road to prosperity. Mr. President, if you permit me to just take a sip of water. I should probably have had something else in that glass as I embark on the discussion about accountability in building prosperity. Mr. President, I'm going to turn to the delicate issue of accountability, because in addressing the nooks and crannies while building prosperity, we must be grounded in principles of accountability. We cannot, Mr. President, talk about accountability without talking about our institutions. Mr. President, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted by the member states of the United Nations in 2015. There are 17 goals outlined, Mr. President, which are the shared goals of the member states, recognizing that a global effort is required to end poverty, improve health and education, reduce inequality, drive economic growth, address the urgencies of climate change, and preserve the environment from which we all derive the requirements for life. Mr. President, you know, I always want to make sure that I'm talking to my ordinary Jamaicans and they're understanding what I'm saying. So let me unpack it a bit. What are these SDGs? They are each one of them a goal that has been set and agreed by the global community that we're all being called to urgently strive to achieve. The achievement of these goals, it has ultimately been agreed, is what will ensure that we all have a future world that supports our existence in a healthy and harmonious way. They're not airy-fairy aspirations. In the building of prosperity for all our citizens, these goals represent the kind of things we need to consider as we construct our prosperity home, the kinds of things we must be mindful of as we carefully examine the nooks and crannies of our building to ensure that no one is left behind. As an example, Mr. President, the first SDG is no poverty. The second is no hunger. The third is good health and well-being. And the fifth is quality education. Mr. President, you'd agree these are the kinds of goals that we can all personalize and connect to. In poverty, hunger, ill health, and lack of education, we would each personally be at a disadvantage to achieve prosperity. So, Mr. President, the SDGs are actually practical aspirations. I draw the attention of the honorable members of the Senate to the 16th goal. That is, Mr. President, to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. For emphasis, Mr. President, the global community has agreed that in order for us to achieve a sustainable future, we all need to ensure that we build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Why is it important to have strong institutions, Mr. President? Let's talk about that for a little bit. In 2019, Mr. Peter Praet, he was an executive board member of the European Central Bank, delivered a presentation entitled, "Of the Importance of Institutions as Providers of Stability and Protection in an Uncertain World." In that presentation to the Steptoe Brussels Open Conference Series, Mr. Praet said this: "Institutions contribute to stability, especially in times of uncertainty, and anchor expectations. In times of political gridlock, effective institutions are vital since they deliver their mandates decisively and outside of the pull and push of the political process. Mr. President, there's a book called Why Nations Fail: The Origins of Power, Prosperity, and Poverty. It's a New York Times bestseller, yes, and was written by eminent economics scholars Darren Acemoglu, a professor of economics at MIT, and James Robertson, a professor of economics at the University of Chicago School of Public Policy. Why Nations Fail examines the very question its title asks, and ultimately, it concludes that the key determinant of a nation's success or failure lies in its institutions. It talks about two types of institutions: inclusive institutions and extractive institutions. What does that mean? Well, extractive institutions we interact with all the time. They're those which concentrate power and wealth in the hands of a few elites. Suppression of political freedom, limitation on economic opportunities, and exploitation of the majority for the benefit of a few. That's what extractive institutions are about. The systems set up in extractive institutions are constructed in such a way that it is often tedious and difficult for ordinary people, when they engage with these institutions, to fully participate. So, without joining the bandwagon of beating up on them, the banking institutions are like that. They provide an essential service, but they're difficult to engage with. They extract a great deal of effort from ordinary people in order to engage and participate in the services that they offer. And different people enjoy different experiences with the banking system. Inequality of treatment is a common thread. On the other hand, inclusive institutions are described as those which promote broad political and economic participation, protect property rights, and provide equal opportunities for individuals to succeed. In plain language, Mr. President, inclusive institutions do not distinguish between the haves and the have-nots. They do not seek to provide a benefit to the elite while putting the ordinary man through hurdles to engage his participation. They are also characterized, Mr. President, by strong accountability matrices. With inclusive institutions, every person has equal opportunity and no one is left behind. The Integrity Commission is an important institution in the building of prosperity. Since 2016, Mr. President, this administration has sought to introduce legislation to strengthen our institutions, and one of those is the Integrity Commission Act, the act which governs the Integrity Commission, a commission of Parliament. As we all should know, the Integrity Commission came into being consequent on efforts to establish a single anti-corruption agency by amalgamating the efforts of the Integrity Commission established under the Parliament Integrity of Members Act, the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption, and the Office of the Contractor General. Integrity Commission is what I call one of the accountability institutions. The Auditor General is another. That exists to monitor public officials, whether they hold executive, administrative, judicial, or parliamentary office, and to ensure that these groups meet the standards of ethical conduct, and also they promote and strengthen measures to prevent, detect, investigate, and indeed prosecute acts of corruption. Mr. President, I have the privilege of serving as a member of the Joint Select Committee of Parliament reviewing the Integrity Commission Act. The Joint Select Committee has been constituted to review the Act and to make recommendations as necessary for the strengthening of the Act and ultimately the reform of the Integrity Commission. It's important work, Mr. President. When Mr. Pratt spoke in Brussels 4 years ago about the role of institutions in providing stability to nations, he also described one of the ways institutions could provide that stability. He said, they provide stability by their very nature of being hard to change. But he also said, that inertia can lead them to lack the agility to deal with new challenges. It is therefore essential for modern institutions to evaluate the impact of their policies and the effectiveness of their strategy on an ongoing basis. Evaluation of impact and effectiveness. Institutions must on a regular basis reassess themselves. It is this important work, Mr. President, that the Joint Select Committee is undertaking on behalf of this Commission of Parliament. In my capacity as a member of the Joint Select Committee, I have had the benefit of reading and hearing the submissions of various stakeholders, including the Integrity Commission itself. There are many proposals that have been submitted to the Joint Select Committee with which I agree, and others of which, as of this date, I am yet to be persuaded. I must say, though, that I have found the discussions on the reform of the Integrity Commission, which have been taking place in the public space, including in this Parliament, a bit jarring, to say the least. Discussions about accountability are important discussions to have as a nation, but they also need to be held in a spirit of nation building that does not pit any segment of our society against the other. That is not in the interest of nation building. In many instances, the language and tone of the discussions I have heard appear to suggest that all politicians are corrupt, or that they wish not to be held accountable, or in the alternative, that the Integrity Commission is biased and essentially out to get all politicians. It is with regret that I confess that I have heard this tone adopted by some politicians, media personalities, civil society groups, and the Integrity Commission itself. We have mishandled ourselves collectively. Mr. President, the issue of accountability and reform of the Integrity Commission is too important for us to be taking this kind of divisive approach to the discussions. It does nothing good for our democracy and for having open and honest discussions about the principles of accountability and the role and function of the Integrity Commission. It serves no one, no single person, no organization, and it certainly does not serve our country. It is a misguided view, in my humble opinion, to seek to pit political representatives against the Integrity Commission or vice versa. This is not a fight. Political representatives and the Integrity Commission ought not to be in a sparring match. We are all, Mr. President, seeking to build this country, seeking to ensure that our rock Jamaica is served well with the best policies, strong institutions, and ultimately benefits from all of our best intentions. Mr. President, it is my earnest hope that in this my maiden contribution to the State of the Nation debate in the Senate, that on this subject, the subject of reform of the Integrity Commission, I can convince my fellow citizens to recenter the public discussions and to focus ourselves on the sober, diligent, and critical analysis that is necessary when we seek to reform our institutions in the best interest of our country and our people. I do not intend to discuss every proposal, Mr. President, that was made to the Joint Select Committee. This is not the place nor the time, and I am taking up a lot of your time today. I do wish, however, to speak to a few of them which I believe are at the heart of the controversy and the divisive tone that have permeated the discussions about the Integrity Commission. The first of these, Mr. President, is a question of the constitution of the Commission. In February 23, member from Southwest St. Catherine, Mr. Everett Warmington, submitted a list of proposals to the Joint Select Committee, one of which is to amend the list of persons that can be appointed as commissioners by removing from that list the Office of the Auditor General. Is this a valuable proposal? Is the question we should ask. To critically assess the value of this proposal requires us to take a look at the functions of the Auditor General, indeed another Commissioner of Parliament, without emotion. Mr. President, Section 120 of the Constitution, which establishes the Office of the Auditor General, and in conjunction with Section 122, which sets out the broad functions of the office, suggests that the Auditor General has a duty to audit and report on the accounts of public bodies, ministries, departments, and agencies of government, the courts, and the Parliament, and report on our findings. Section 122(5) also sets out that nothing prevents the performance of the Auditor General of such other functions in relation to the accounts of the GOJ and other public authorities and other bodies administering public funds as may be prescribed by or under any law. Such other functions in relation to the accounts. Such other functions in relation to the supervision and control of expenditure from public funds in Jamaica as may be prescribed. Such other functions in relation to the accounts of any other government as she may be empowered to perform by any authority competent in that behalf. Mr. President, the Financial Administration and Audit Act prescribes some other functions of the Auditor General. At Section 25, and particularly I direct your attention to paragraph F. The Auditor General shall, in performing his functions under Section 122(1) of the Constitution, ascertain whether, in his opinion, satisfactory procedures have been established to measure and report on the effectiveness of programs and services. Satisfactory procedures have been established to measure and report on the effectiveness of programs and services. Mr. President, much ado has been made of the proposal that the Office of the Auditor General be removed from the bodies eligible for appointment as commissioners of the Integrity Commission. For those who oppose the proposal, I have not heard a single substantive reason why the proposal is unworthy of consideration. Indeed, Mr. President, the chairman of the Integrity Commission published his remarks as part of the 2022-23 annual report of the Integrity Commission, and he said this: "It seems that at the top of the parliamentary committee's agenda is the removal of a key member of the Commission, the Auditor General. This is surprising to me. The other commissioners, the staff of the Commission, and to members of the public who are concerned about the general perception of corruption in our beautiful country." He went on, "I'm stating emphatically again for the record and for posterity that I'm against this proposal, as it will only weaken the Commission. The Auditor General has been a fixture on the body set up to monitor the behavior of public officials in their public roles. That has been the position for approximately 50 years, he said." He continued, "I am not aware of anything that has happened since 2017 to warrant the removal of the Auditor General. In fact, from what I have seen, there is clear reason for the Auditor General to be on the Commission." I find these remarks unhelpful, Mr. President, in the context of critically analyzing whether the Auditor General is appropriately placed as a member of the Commission. Unfortunately, the learned chairman has provided no basis for his conclusion that there is clear reason for the Auditor General to sit as a member of the Commission, and so his remarks have not assisted my analysis. We cannot refuse to review our institutions because we choose to rely on an unmeritorious and incalcitrant position that because it has always been done so for years, then it must continue. That can't be the basis on which we refuse to review them. If, as the Constitution and subordinate legislation provides, the Auditor General has the duties as I have outlined and quoted before, then it is not appropriate for the Auditor General to sit as a participating member of any board or any commission of any body, much less the Integrity Commission. We must be able to distance ourselves from the emotions of public life and politics to understand what our legal framework in the wisdom of our founding fathers and the consensus of Parliament have crafted. The Auditor General wasn't intended to be a participant in the running of public bodies, ministries, departments, agencies, or any entity that has carriage of public funds and public functions. I'm going to pause. The Auditor General, Mr. President, is our reviewer. She is our examiner. She is our check and our balance. She is a body that is constitutionally mandated and empowered to ensure that public entities with conduct of government affairs and funds are discharging their duties appropriately, ethically, and within the bounds of the law. That means, Mr. President, she has responsibility for the Integrity Commission as well. In the current circumstance where she sits as a commissioner, she's hindered in doing that. In effect, what we have done by including her as an eligible commissioner is to place her in an unenviable position of conflict with her constitutional and statutory duties. Sure, she could audit the commission anyway, even though she may have participated in a decision, but it's not the best practice. She would have to, no valid proposition has been put forward that provides a basis for her membership on the commission. Indeed, the commission, Mr. President, at all times, like every other public body, statutory authority, and government ministry, can solicit the opinion of the Auditor General at any time it chooses, without her being a member of the board of that body. There's a concern, Mr. President. You see, justice must not only be done, but it must manifestly be seen to be done. It is quite likely that you could have a scenario where the Integrity Commission will investigate a matter as a result of a report that was submitted by the Auditor General. In such a case, Mr. President, she therefore ends up being a witness whose evidence is taken into account and the judge in the matter at one and the same time. And that conflict is not solved by her simply recusing herself in such instances. Recusal should rarely have to be used. If it has to be invoked frequently, as would be the case in such instances, then it means she ought not be present as a member of the commission in the first place. So the argument has been proffered, Mr. President, that there's a substitute in place and that, like the Auditor General, who is audited by the Ministry of Finance, the Integrity Commission is audited by a private independent auditor. So let me share with you what I have found. Section 20 of the Integrity Commission Act tells us that the accounts of the Commission shall be audited annually by an auditor approved in each year by the Commission, with the approval of the Minister, and a statement of accounts so audited shall form part of the annual report, which is submitted pursuant to Section 36. So let's look at Section 36. Paragraph 2 of that section says that the Commission must submit an annual report to Parliament relating generally to the execution of the functions of the Commission during the preceding financial year, and that report is to contain the information outlined in the second schedule. So if you follow me along the legislative maze to the second schedule, the schedule says that the report of the Integrity Commission must contain the following information: a general description of the matters reported to and investigated by it, details about the matters investigated, recommendations for changes to the law or for administrative action, nature and extent of any information submitted to the security forces, number of matters investigated resulting in prosecution or disciplinary action, description of the Commission's activities during the accounting year, number of convictions and acquittals, and the time taken to dispose of the matters where a charge is laid, and such other information as the Commission thinks relevant, excluding matters under investigation and for which criminal proceedings have been initiated. The ninth thing it says is the audited financial statements. The only role that is currently prescribed for the appointed auditor under Section 20 is that of auditing the financial statements. And if you look at the annual reports of the Commission, you will find support for that statement. You will see that the role of the auditor that is appointed to review the Integrity Commission each year is limited to reviewing financial statements. The appointed auditor does not review the processes established by the Integrity Commission to perform its work, save and except where those processes deal with possible misstatements in the numbers presented and the accounting policies of the Commission. It's not a qualitative audit that the appointed auditor undertakes. It is a quantitative one. Mr. President, we have to unfetter the Auditor General in the interest of strengthening the Integrity Commission. The recent kerfuffle surrounding the tabling of the report of the Integrity Commission's investigations into the circumstances surrounding the award of GOJ contracts to Westcon Construction Limited are a prime example of why the Auditor General ought not sit as a member of the Integrity Commission. In that now infamous report, the Director of Investigations recommended that the matter concerning the potential conflict of interest which arose in relation to the recommendation which was made by the Most Honorable Andrew Holness is being referred to the Director of Corruption Prosecution for consideration with respect to breaches of the Contractor General Act and some other acts. That report was tabled in the House on the 4th of February, and we all know the consternation it caused nationally and internationally. And that was compounded, Mr. President, by a further report of the Commission, this time from the Director of Corruption Prosecution on Thursday afternoon, the 16th of February, 2 full days after the first report, advising the recommendation that the PM be referred for prosecution. That second report, Mr. President, was tabled at the next sitting of the House the following week on 21st February 2023, and in the Senate on the 24th of February 2023. Mr. President, the second report said in relation to the recommendation that the PM be referred for possible prosecution, and I quote, "With additional material being made available which investigations have failed to contradict or provide more evidence in support of the offenses contemplated, no criminal charges can be laid." It remains, Mr. President, a complete exoneration of the Prime Minister, but only after the damage had already been done to his reputation and to our collective reputation as Brand Jamaica. Since then, Mr. President, the Integrity Commission issued a press release addressing the matter and stating that there is no provision that mandates the tabling of a ruling of the DCP. In other words, there was nothing requiring them to table the DCP's ruling, despite the fact that it exonerated the PM in the context of the referral for possible prosecution by the DI. No requirement for them to table it simultaneously. Without more, I find myself reluctantly agreeing with the IC's position. But, Mr. President, Section 36(3) empowers the Integrity Commission to table a report relating to any particular matter which, in the opinion of the Commission, requires the special attention of the Parliament. Mr. President, there can be no dispute that the ruling of the DCP was a matter that required the special attention of Parliament. The IC instead took the narrow view that the ruling could not be tabled concurrently with the report of the Director of Investigations based on Section 53(3) of the so-called gag clause, which states that until the tabling in Parliament of a report under Section 36, all matters under investigation by the Director of Investigation or any other person involved in such investigation shall be kept confidential, and no report or public statement shall be made by the Commission or any other person in relation to the initiation or conduct of that investigation, conduct of an investigation. I infer, Mr. President, that the narrow view was based on how the Integrity Commission defined the word until. And in my opinion, it did so in such a narrow way that until meant that two reports could not be tabled at the same sitting. As a consequence of the position taken by the IC, the nation was plunged into a most unfortunate situation A cynical view that has been expressed is that this was deliberately done by the IC as a form of protest against the gag clause. If that were to be so, it would be unworthy of a body with the seriousness of responsibilities and the extensiveness of the powers of the IC. Since then, Mr. President, we have had no resolve on this matter. Nothing to say whether what the Integrity Commission did was correct or not. I suggest, Mr. President, that this is a matter that could well have benefited from the unfettering of the Auditor General from the Integrity Commission, so that she, as a constitutionally mandated authority for reviewing public bodies, I use that term public bodies loosely, could have looked into this matter, which in the short space of 2 days plunged this country into turmoil. I'm not commenting on the tweets and the other statements which may have been made at that time, Mr. President. I don't intend to get personal, nor to disparage any individual. I really want to try and focus my colleagues on our nation on the question of how do you strengthen this institution, the Integrity Commission. I'm here to say emphatically that the Integrity Commission is one of our most important institutions in the building of public trust and confidence. For that reason, whether you consider this a fundamental issue or a nook and cranny issue, and for the other reasons which I have outlined, the Auditor General ought to be unshackled from membership on the Commission so that she can freely engage her mandate in review of the Integrity Commission in the interest of strengthening the institution and our institutions generally and building public trust. I will say further on this issue of the Auditor General's membership on the Commission, Mr. President, that the body designed to ensure ethical conduct of public officials should itself want to submit itself to the jurisdiction of the constitutionally mandated authority and not to an appointed auditor who is not directed by her, and this cannot be done while the Auditor General sits as a member of the Commission. Mr. President, before I leave this point, I want to make it manifestly clear. The view that I express on the Auditor General's membership on the Commission mustn't in any way be construed as questioning the integrity of the Auditor General. In fact, it is the opposite. She has been exemplary in the performance of her duties. So understand this, I'm not joining any bandwagon that would seek to impugn either the office of the Auditor General or the character of this Auditor General who has been an outstanding public servant. Mr. President, I previously spelled out the language of the provision of the so-called gag clause, and I say so-called because I'm not of the view this is an accurate description of the provision, never have been. However, given the reasoning of the Integrity Commission and its conduct in tabling the reports dealing with the Prime Minister in February of this year, I am concluding that more than one interpretation of Section 53(3) is possible. Accordingly, I join those who have made calls to amend this provision. I want it to be clear, though, that I'm not in support of the provision being removed. People's reputation must not be trifled with. When the Contractor General, as happened so often in the past, publicly announced that he was investigating a matter that concerned a particular public official, that official's character and integrity are immediately brought into question. He or she begins to attract funny stares when they appear in public. People will be seen conversing in hushed tones. When a report is eventually submitted to Parliament 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 years later, which clears that official of any wrongdoing, the damage has been done. People have formed their impressions. Potential employers may still be wary of hiring such a person. The police don't make an announcement about an investigation being undertaken, unless the matter somehow finds itself in the public domain. And the police are asked to comment. Even then, very often they prudently refuse to offer any comment. The so-called gag clause might never even have been thought of if there had not been so many instances where the character and integrity of public officers were sullied in the public space only for the investigation to yield no evidence to support the basis on which the investigation was undertaken. I am unapologetically a believer in the systems and the structures of Parliament, the place where the people speak through their representatives. And for that reason, Mr. President, while I agree Section 53(3) should be amended, it should be amended to ensure that the reports of the Integrity Commission are tabled in the Parliament, and that at any time the Commission needs to say something to the people of Jamaica in respect of an investigation on any Jamaican, that it is not left to the whim and the fancy of any particular person as to what they will say and where, but that it is properly placed before the people in the houses of the people. And when it is delivered, it must be tabled. Mr. President, I would be remiss to leave this issue without frontally addressing the issue of the 6 parliamentarians, which the Integrity Commission revealed it was investigating for illicit enrichment. Much has been said of a speculative nature about this revelation by the Integrity Commission, which it made in its annual report for 22-23. I think, Mr. President, any concerns expressed as to whether parliamentarians being investigated for illicit enrichment are participating in committees that have oversight of the Integrity Commission is a valid concern. The difficulty, Mr. President, is that since the tabling of the 22-23 annual report, the Integrity Commission has either failed to conclude the investigation or to issue a report to the Parliament on the specific investigations as a matter that ought to come to the special attention of the Parliament. And, Mr. President, let's just take a look at the concern. The concerns which arise are valid. But the response to the concerns cannot be to acquiesce to demands that a person who is investigated must disclose. The response to the concerns cannot be to call out and impugn the character of parliamentarians on the political hustings. Had a report been issued to the Parliament by now, some 4 months since the revelation, we may very well have been learning that either further investigation was needed, a referral for prosecution was being done, or the Integrity Commission was satisfied that there was no need for any further action. In the latter case, the parliamentarian who is being investigated would be the subject of public disclosure of the investigation, but also simultaneous disclosure that the investigation revealed no wrongdoing. Mr. President, it's important to note that the consternation is because of the high level of scrutiny of politicians. Recall the disclosure in the annual report, was about 6 politicians being investigated for illicit enrichment and 28 public officials. And yet I have heard barely any mention of the 28 public officials in public utterances. The sole focus is on the parliamentarians. And I understand why that may be so. So, Mr. President, how do we avoid this? It's not in the interest of this country for these matters to simply lie in the public domain without more. There must be expeditious investigation of matters, especially where it touches and concerns sitting members of the Houses of Parliament. It is simply not in furtherance of what the Integrity Commission declares as its core values, being professionalism, integrity, fairness, accountability, and transparency, for the investigations to take this long, especially when it surrounds a matter such as illicit enrichment. Mr. President, we want a robust anti-corruption body. That is good governance. It's good for governance. So we need to consider whether or not there's a need to establish timelines for the Integrity Commission to conduct its work. Mr. President, an investigation does not, contrary to the mischievous statements being made in the public domain by parliamentarians and others, give any indication of guilt. Being the subject of an investigation does not equate to guilt. So the onus cannot be on the person being investigated to make any disclosure of the fact of the investigation. That is not the principle of our legal jurisprudence. So if the disclosure is made, as was done in the annual report, then the expectation and the standard ought to be that the Integrity Commission, the body making the disclosure, expeditiously does its work to ensure that the relevant investigations are completed, and if not, that a special report is laid before the Parliament utilizing the legislation, indicating what, if anything, is causing a delay. Since the matter of parliamentarians being accused of illicit enrichment certainly falls within the ambit of something that should be brought to the special attention of the Parliament. Certainly, Mr. President, 4 months. 4 months. And nothing further is simply not good governance practice. And it is most definitely not good for our country. Mr. President, I had a whole section talking about filing statutory declarations that I'm going to hop, skip, and jump over. And the reason is this, that the Integrity Commission has made a submission, as I understand it, in proposing an increase in the threshold that trigger the duty to file a statutory declaration. But I'll just say this about it. And of course, the need arises because of the increased public sector salaries. They have been so significant that the numbers of people who would now need to file a statutory declaration has mushroomed. It may be timely, though, Mr. President, to look at the factors that trigger the requirement to file statutory declarations. Whether it's a salary amount that ought to invite the duty to file, which is where we are now, or whether we ought to be doing a risk-based analysis of the role and duties of a particular function to determine whether the risk of corruption in a particular role is such that the role ought to be required or subjected to the duty to file a statutory declaration. How much opportunity exists, for example, for a classroom teacher or a senior nurse to engage in corruption? And yet there are categories of public officials like the person on a road project who certifies how much load or mile the truckman deliver, whose salaries fall below the reporting threshold, that have much more opportunity to engage in corruption. It's not a simple assessment, Mr. President, but it can be done. It can be done. That's the approach used to determine, for example, who has access to certain types of information. And I'm simply seeking here to raise the issue for discussion about a methodology that will ultimately strengthen the ability of the Integrity Commission to really attack corruption, as opposed to getting bogged down in assessing statutory declaration after statutory declaration, taking time and resources, but not really coming from the category of public officials that are likely to be the sources of corrupt acts. There's already provision in the Act that allows for the making of regulations prescribing a public official's salary below the salary cap to submit declarations. So this provision contemplates exactly what I'm suggesting should be considered for all, that a risk-based assessment on the role and the function of the official in respect of the duty to file statutory declarations be the approach taken. I'm on my final lap. And I want to thank my colleagues for their attention. I feel very honored today. I hope I haven't been too loyal in my presentation. I hope I have spoken to issues in a way that all my Jamaican people can appreciate the gravamen of the issues that I'm raising with them. At the end of the day, Mr. President, we all want to see a better country where growth and development are taking place so that our people are afforded the best opportunities for their own personal advancement in a national environment of trust and accountability. That is the promise, Mr. President, of the Andrew Holness-led administration. It's the reason, Mr. President, why I am happy. I was happy to accept the Prime Minister's recommendation for appointment to this Honorable Senate. Prime Minister Holness does not lead a perfect government. He does not lead an infallible government. Neither perfection nor infallibility are marks of a good Prime Minister, nor for the record do they exist in any human being. As our Prime Minister said of the role of Prime Minister in 2016, in his inaugural remarks, the Prime Minister's role is to ensure that government is coordinated and strategically directed. Decisions are taken quickly. Targets are set. The nation is informed, and that everyone under his appointment is held to account for their action or lack thereof. Check, 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 check and check, Mr. President. I serve today, Mr. President, because I continue to believe that our Prime Minister and the government he leads are credibly discharging their obligations. For my part, I am continually humbled by the responsibilities that I must discharge as a member of the Senate. I promise my Jamaican family that while our government continues to build prosperity for us all, I will not forget my oath. I will continue to be faithful and bear true allegiance to Jamaica, to uphold and defend the Constitution and the laws of Jamaica, and to conscientiously and impartially discharge my duties to the people of Jamaica as we continue to build prosperity under the able leadership of Prime Minister Andrew Michael Holness. Mr. President, I end with a reminder of Prime Minister Holness's inaugural remarks when he said that there is need after 53 years of independence, as it then was, for institutional review of the Jamaican state, and further, that there is a need for us to have a say in the fundamental institutions that define Jamaica. Mr. President, I urge my Jamaican family to let us, as a people, collectively focus even harder on the work to be done to build the prosperity which we all want for ourselves and our country, to strengthen the institutions that will ensure our success in building our prosperity, including our institutions of accountability, to ensure that as we build, we do not forget the issues that might fall within the nooks and crannies of our building. In this, our 61st year of independence, I urge my fellow Jamaicans not to become distracted by propaganda. Don't let the hype and the baseless criticisms hold your attention. Do not expose yourself to the fake news or even the empty promises. Now is not the time. This is the time to embrace partnership with our government and our Prime Minister in the strengthening of our institutions, the building of prosperity, and the shoring up of our systems of accountability. And as we do that, to my parliamentary colleagues, to my people, my Jamaican family, I say this: let us debate each other. Let us affirm or rebut, even argue strenuously, but let us not deride nor defame. Our children are watching us. Let us never come to blows or violence in our competition of ideas. It does not become us. It does not serve us. It does not serve our country, Jamaica, land we all love. May it please you, Mr. President, and may it please my family, my people, Jamaica.
Thank you, Senator Golan Campbell. And just to inform the members all that I have spoken to Senator Bunting and Senator Allen, and the choice that Senator Allen has made is to proceed now rather than taking any sort of break. Thank you, Senator Allen. This is not your maiden presentation.
No, it's not my maiden. Fret not.
Meaning that I would have had to have been very lenient with my time, right?
Thank you so much, Mr. President. You know,
Senator Allen, I'm recognizing you from a chair other than your own.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Big seat. Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks to my colleagues for agreeing to proceed with the rest of the day. I actually am calmed by the presentation just now, because I have a tendency to rush through. But I'm assured that today is not the day to rush. But in any event, I begin firstly by just expressing a few words of thanks. Firstly, to my fellow senators, and especially as I stand here today in a certain position, I will say that I will do my best to make sure that my colleague, Lamy, who is recovering quite well, is satisfied with the words that I will offer today. You know, being in here, I've grown to appreciate and look forward to the lessons I learned from my senators. And I learned what to do and also what not to do sometimes. Invaluable lessons. I must thank the members of the staff of the Parliament, guided by Mrs. Curtis, who all give professional and dedicated service to our country. And for that, we are grateful. I am very fortunate to be able to call upon some people who have served in various areas of this country. I call on them, and they give me advice, and I receive them well. They also critique me well. The Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, Dr. Peter Phillips, Dr. Wickham McNeil, former Senators Slowly and Madden. They have always been there, and I'm grateful. To the leader of the opposition, Mr. Mark Golan, the leader of the party that I'm honored to serve, he expresses his confidence in me by being a member of the shadow cabinet, and I thank him. To my task force, who continuously challenge me to be bold, and that I intend to continue to be bold. To every tourism worker, fret not for this side, to every tourism worker who provide me with motivation, drive, and determination to give 100% of myself every day. Some may say that when you're not elected, you don't have a job. I see it as my job anyway, having been asked to serve. And finally, Mr. President, I want to say thanks to my family. And there are 3 members of my family I must single out. My mother, Winnie Veronica. Yes, Miss Winnie. On this side, we call her the 9th senator. Her attendance record is better than mine. My uncle Dave, Dave Allen, who is my advisor and constantly sends me messages or calls me and ends the call with talk to you, which is a veiled threat. Because, you know, as Allens, we're very subtle. And to my sister Nicole, who is the real politician in the family. And she's here today. Oh, I don't even want to look over there. She is the real politician, and she gives me her advice from the most minute to the biggest deal. Mr. President, there's a quote by a famous gentleman that says, "Everyone can be great because everyone can serve." Martin Luther King Jr. My foray into the realm of politics, my service, was not something I planned. However, being here, I've grown to better appreciate the responsibility of not only serving as a senator, but a member of the shadow cabinet overseeing tourism and linkages. We all know that tourism is one of the country's most prized industries, and as such requires not only deep study and understanding, but also effective policy development, varied relations and relationships in order to be successful. After almost 3 decades, 26 years since my formal start in tourism, I now maintain a bird's eye view of the work being carried out in and on behalf of the industry. And I now give Jamaica my position, the site of my position on where the industry should go and what the focus and priority areas should be for the benefit of all Jamaicans in a sustainable way. You see, one could choose to focus on marketing of this amazing product, that's the glitzy side, or focus on the not-so-glamorous side of policy. From my first time as a public servant, I knew then, and I know today, that the right policies can make dramatic changes in a country's trajectory if we have the political will. I know I possess that political will, and when I have the opportunity, will without hesitation focus on and advocate for policies that will not just marginally change, but dramatically change the lives of those who invest in and contribute to tourism. Mr. President, before I go deeper into the state of tourism as I see it, let me just spend a little time to just express some things that I see in my nation today. Things that continue to hold my attention and for which sometimes my heart bleeds. It was my expectation that at my age, I would be able to be full of hope for the future of my country, especially since I am looking at fewer years ahead than behind. Sadly, I'm not able to express that hope today because every day I'm confronted with some harsh realities. Children committing crimes, double, triple, quadruple murders. There was a double murder last night in St. James. Chaos in the streets as taxi drivers hustle and push through and break rules to hustle a dollar. Roadways littered with garbage, destruction of our beautiful coral reefs and other ecological treasures. A broken education system that's not preparing our children adequately. Sometimes I wish I didn't have to read or listen to the news and that I could bury my head in the sand and that it would all go away because I'm desperately craving good news like adequate spaces for play for the young and the old. And if Senator Longmore was here, that's one thing she and I agree on quite strongly. Access to reliable, affordable health care. Access to, affordable cost of living. Regenerated coral reefs or revived rural communities alongside urban development. These are just some of the things I, along with many Jamaicans, long for. I want to be hopeful and happy and content and know all of us in here wish for that. We in this chamber have a duty to restore hope, and it starts with an acknowledgement of the realities being faced by our people, and then the willingness to be of true service to do the things that we ourselves may not benefit from. Mr. President, there's a saying that I have constantly repeated since I've come across it. A society grows great when old men plant trees, the shade of which they may never sit in. As servants of the people, we must look in the mirror and give account of the trees that we are planting. It is time we get out of the usual 4- and 5-year cycle and begin to plant those trees, the shade of which we may never, some of us in this chamber, sit in. We must be bold, unselfish, and be true to service to our fellow citizens and put in place longer-term planning. Mr. President, this is my 3rd State of the Nation address, and I feel like I'm in the final year of a study. And my vision for tourism could not be more clear. It is often said that tourism is the lifeblood of the economy and that it contributes significantly to employment, investments, foreign exchange earnings. I concur with that, but I would also proffer 2 questions. Can tourism do more to change the lives of ordinary workers or the fate of small businesses in this industry? And can tourism be more transformative? You see, Mr. President, I want us to have an honest review and really see how it impacts lives. Whether it can or should do more, should be doing more, for whether it is the hotel manager, the housekeeper or bartender who has worked for 25 years, or the craft vendor at Harbour Street Craft Market who laments of slow sales, or the Juta driver who is struggling to afford a park at a hotel and now is considering to sell his bus. It is often said that tourism also transforms communities. But have we stopped to ask the people how they see tourism and how it's changing their communities? If tourism generates billions each year, then we must be able to see the tangible results by the transformation of communities from one generation to the next. Otherwise, tourism will continuously to be referred to as an extractive industry and not the transformative one we all hope for. These are real concerns to contend with. So whether it's Flanker or Farm Heights, Granville or Green Island, Hopewell or Hamden, the people must be able to feel the impact of tourism in their communities more than a beautiful sign.
Senator Sinclair,
Mr.
you're going to have an
President,
opportunity to present, you know. I'm not going to allow you to interfere with Senator Allen. Do not pay attention to him, Senator. Just continue.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Sinclair, please.
Like I said before, whether it is Flanker or Farm Heights, yes, Granville or Green Island, yes, Hopewell or Hamden, yes, the people must be able to feel the impact of tourism in their communities. Mr. President, the future is not only about the owners of capital. It is also about the providers of labor, the people who really make the wheels of tourism turn. And it is our responsibility to create the legislative and policy framework to better their lives and communities, improve their working conditions, and provide greater facilitation for their entrepreneurial efforts. You know, there are a couple of people who I have to pause, Mr. President, and give some recognition to.
Not Sinclair.
Definitely not. Mr. President, let me use the opportunity today to single out a few stalwarts, 3 of them actually, who are some of the people who have kept the wheels of tourism turning. 2 weeks ago, some of them were conferred with national honors and others with parish honors. I start with Mrs. Sherene Crichton. Not the only, she's the general manager of the prestigious Half Moon Hotel. And as a woman, I single her out because whilst women make up the majority of the workforce in the industry, we do not make up the equal level at the C-suite. So, I commend Sherene Crichton, not only for her contribution to Half Moon, but to Jamaica's tourism product. Mr. Clifton Reeder, immediate past president of the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association, long-standing hotelier and now vice president of Palace Resorts, Jamaica and Turks and Caicos Islands. And the third person, Mr. Wayne Cummings, long-time Sandals executive and former JHTA president. He was one of those presidents that any minister, any side, would fear because he holds no punches and he tells it like it is and advocates always for the industry. He was just awarded the Sam Sharp Award by the parish of St. James. Mr. President, as I look at the impact of tourism on the economy and the environment, I start with the Tourism Enhancement Fund, which was established during the tenure of former Minister of Tourism, Ambassador Aluna Asambo, in 2005. The TEF was established to implement recommendations emanating from the 2002 Master Plan for Sustainable Development of the Tourism Sector. When the PNP developed the plan, one focus was the need for the investment, growth, and expansion of the industry. And we are glad that successive administrations have utilized that plan and stayed the course. We are seeing the clear results from the hard work, planning, and most importantly, vision of the People's National Party government. We are constantly reminded of this every time the Minister of Tourism announces arrival numbers and new hotels coming. However, this was only one portion of the plan and the vision. The other portion of the mandate was to enhance the product and create a sustainable environment for future development. This is why it took major effort on the part of policymakers and the industry at the time to impose the fee. I am aware that the policymakers only got the buy-in from the overseas partners, airlines, tour operators, to implement this fee because the partners were given the assurance that the proceeds from the fee would be used to further enhance the tourism product. In 2018, according to the Ministry of Tourism, the TEF was restructured to operate as a Center for Innovation for Tourism, which saw the formation of 3 new departments or divisions: Tourism Linkage Network, Jamaica Center of Tourism Innovation, and the Craft Development Institute. It is, of course, important for linkages to be strengthened, for there to be facilitation of innovation, and also for there to be craft development, which has languished for many years. If you ask any craft trader, they'll tell you that. However, here's my question. With the restructuring of the TEF, how is that other portion of the mandate being addressed? The part that says encouraging better management of environmental resources or enhancing the tourist experience by providing the sustainable development for the sector. Is that no longer of priority?
Thank you, Senator Allen. 1 minute, please.
Mr. President, the time being almost 1:20, might the Senate sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day?
Thank you, Minister. Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? And Minister, this is one of the things that we are looking at in the Standing Orders Committee. Is it necessary? But we'll change it. Senator Allen, sorry to have interrupted you.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. President. You see, when we're looking at a plan, we have to look at everything or look at what our mandate is or was. We have to balance. Because it seems as though when some persons read the plan, they only read the cliff notes because they didn't really fully understand what was expected. So let me ask a few questions. How are we reinvesting in the industry for its long-term sustainable development? Where is that plan and how are we measuring results against it? You see, the reality is that that plan, the Tourism Master Plan, which was in 2002, was intended to be 10 years with a review to take place and constantly review because the environment changes. So it means, therefore, that we are still operating on something that possibly is outdated and that we're just continuing and doing things as we've been doing them. And we can see the results in how things are going today, because clearly we're on autopilot. I want to ask also, because the TEF was intended to do this, remember the enhancing part of it, where are those iconic attractions and monuments to enhance the product? It is time that we become brave and bold, because we can't continue to develop on what we have. Dunn's River, Martha Brae, Wyeth Falls. We can't depend on those alone. We have to think big. When we built the monument in Kingston here at the Emancipation Park, great furore over the monument that was put there. But now if you remove it, it would be a great furore in removing it. I want us to think big, Eiffel Tower big. By now, every resort area should have something, because that's what the TEF was supposed to do. We have amazing people to celebrate. Usain Bolt, Bob Marley, Marcus Garvey, Miss Lou. I know we had a statue recently with Miss Lou, but we need to be big and bold, because we need to ensure that people are coming to Jamaica for only the things that they can see in Jamaica. Because we're more than a beach. Yes. We're a culture. Yes. We're a people. Yes. And that is what you come to Jamaica for. So I want us to get out of the small thinking. I'm not into small thinking. I have no time for that. But whilst I'm at it, Mr. President, and I want my colleague across the way to pay attention.
The one from the west.
While I'm at it, the minister touted an iconic project in Falmouth, and he referred to it as the Artisan Village, and it was going to transform shopping experience for all, especially cruise passengers. This is the project with the longest gestation period that I've ever seen. From 2016 it's coming and it don't reach yet. In August I raised it to ask what is going on with this project. I was told it would be open in October. And we're 3 days from the end of October and still not open. When I called and spoke with an official at the ministry, I was told that the minister is going to make a statement about it soon. I'm just saying, we cannot be spending over $1 billion on what is promised to be an iconic project to enhance the product. It's not delivered and nobody is held accountable.
Just like Cornwall.
I'll come into that. As part of the enhancing of the product also, I want to see the TEF identify and build out, in partnership with the private sector where possible, more parks in communities equipped with the necessary elements to allow for exercise and recreation. And I'm going to start with Old Hospital Park. I am coming to, you don't dictate my speech. Okay, you don't dictate it. I am starting with the Old Hospital Park. In 2011, to be exact, the now minister and minister then opened that park at $45 million. Today, it sits there rotting. And the municipal corporation is telling us that they cannot afford to maintain it. That's unacceptable. Unacceptable. Now, imagine, also in Montego Bay, that is supposed to be the tourist capital, you have another unused park just down the road, across the street, the old fort. Again, nothing. Another one, Howard Cook Boulevard. Some of us don't even remember that there's a park down there. Unused, unmaintained. And you know what? I am happy that we are trying to have crosstalk here. But let me just add something to this crosstalk. When you have people living almost in cramped spaces in places like Canterbury or Railway Lane or Paradise Row in the heart of the tourism capital, they need to get space to breathe. That's why we have some of the problems that we have. It is the responsibility of the government through agencies like the UDC, the Tourism Product Development Company and others, to ensure that we show and improve the circumstances of the people. And don't tell me about Harmony Park. Harmony Park is one. We need more than one. And thanks to the PNP for that plan. Relax yourself. Relax yourself.
Mr. President, I need protection for this for Senator Janice.
Senator Sinclair. I notice.
I'm going to name you, you know.
Senator Binns, you and Senator Sinclair, I'm noticing a creeping indiscipline. Senator Allen, don't take him on. Senator Sinclair, no doubt you'll have an opportunity to discuss these things. No. Senator Allen, continue, please.
You know, the city of Montego Bay is supposedly the tourism capital of Jamaica. So when we come in here and trivialize, at the end of the day, tourism earns billions of dollars, and Montego Bay can't see that. We're not feeling it. At the end of the day, St. James is home to 4 ministers of government. 4, including the Minister of Tourism and the Deputy Prime Minister. And I would have thought, having 4 ministers of government, that my parish would be the envy of this country. But it's not. Jimmy Cliff Boulevard, better known to Montegonians as Bottom Road. Jimmy Cliff Boulevard, the renovation of that boulevard has been on the table for more than a decade. And every time you go to a meeting, you're being told it is to come and this is to happen. The last meeting I attended this year, I was told that work would start by the end of this year. We're practically at the end of this year and nothing has happened. Now, Senator Sinclair, have a little, please. Please. You know, the benefit of this craziness is that he's helping to reinforce the points and about the Montego Bay that we are not satisfied with, because he sits in the municipality and has responsibility for a better city. And here we are today trying to cover up the fact that Montego Bay, it's a shame what it looks like. And as a member of that council, you hold some responsibility to ensure that it is improved. It's 3 years I'm at this and I have a little practice. You might have more, but I have some. Jimmy Cliff Boulevard right now ought to be better. When you walk along Jimmy Cliff Boulevard, the other day I was there, I almost broke my ankle. Broken sidewalk, a web of electrical wires all over I can almost reach and touch. And generally unacceptable for supposedly, and imagine we call it Jimmy Cliff Boulevard. It's a shame, one of our icons. Unacceptable. So I'm calling on the minister and the TEF to give some answers now about the state of that project, because it's unacceptable that it keeps lingering. Another concern that I have with Montego Bay, because you must expect that if I come here talking about the state of the nation, I will spend a little time on Montego Bay. There's a growing concern with the increased population of people living on the streets who are in need of medical care. I've seen this increase, and right now I must pause to give kudos to the police for their recent solving of a murder of a gentleman who was on the street unwell. And in record time, they were able to get a conviction, 7 months, I am told. I received a call recently from a tourism worker complaining about what he's recognizing on the streets, especially on Bottom Road, with more people on the streets. And he asked if there can be some intervention for the sake of tourism. And I said to him, we must not be doing this for the sake of tourism. We must do this for the sake of our people. Tourism will benefit. So it's not a tourism problem, but tourism has the opportunity to involve themselves in solving this problem, because tourism and the tourism capital has benefited from and earned a lot of money for Jamaica, and I'd like to see more investment in this by the ministry. When I look around the city, not even the elegant corridor is in good shape. There seems to be a lack of maintenance, and I'm not talking about verge cutting. I'm talking about maintenance that beautifies the place. We're a tropical country. We need to look like a tropical country. And like I've said before, make Jamaica good and beautiful for Jamaicans, and it will benefit our tourism product. We have to provide better facilities for our people. The fourth of 5 things I want to mention about Montego Bay is the Cornwall Regional Hospital. Now, Cornwall, I just toured it this week with Dr. Maurice Guy and a few others. And whilst the Children's Hospital, which, as I said before and will say it again, must be named after Portia Simpson Miller, that project is coming along well, but there is still delays with Cornwall Regional Hospital. And why do I bring it up within the context of tourism? At the end of the day, I would hate to think that our city, our town, is not equipped to handle any eventuality. And we are on borrowed time, having not had this project completed. The Minister of Tourism and the Ministry of Tourism must show some interest in this project because it adds value to the tourism product. So I'm calling on the Minister. It's not his purview, but it's in his interest for the Cornwall Regional Hospital to come back on. And I'm still calling again for an investigation into that project because it makes no sense. I cannot understand how a project with such lengthy delays, such overruns, is not being investigated. And maybe this is one of the things the Auditor General should be looking at. The final matter on Montego Bay that I will point to is something that will take political will. There needs to be some rationalization of all the crafts markets that are in Montego Bay. They are currently Success, Holiday Village, Fantasy, 4th Street, Harbour Street, all within close proximity. And all of the traders in all of those markets are having a hard time. We have to find ways to help them some of them to transition into other businesses, provide them the avenue to upskill or cross-skill in other areas, because it makes no sense to continue to fool ourselves that it can continue as is. Like I said before, Mr. President, we must be willing to plant trees, the shade of which we may never sit under. And this is one such tree that must be planted. If Montegonians are to feel like they're a part of the tourism capital, which earns billions of dollars each year, then it's high time that tourism invests in and transforms Montego Bay by addressing these and other issues that plague the city. Otherwise, we are left to question the status it was granted. It is high time that the TEF does some enhancing of the product of this capital city. Mr. President,
Mr. President, the Speaker's time having elapsed, might she be permitted sufficient time to complete her presentation?
Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Thank you very much. Senator Allen, continue, please.
thank you very much. It's the unruliness that causes it, you know. Mr. President, we on this side are fully aware that for growth and development to be realized, there must be investments and that it's the government's responsibility to provide an enabling environment for these investments to be realized and work in harmony with the local supporting sectors. This is where I crave the indulgence of Senator Hill. Foreign investments have benefited Jamaica and the development of our tourism product for many years. In fact, a massive wave of foreign direct investments was seen between the 1990s and the early 2000s, on which subsequent investments followed. Jamaica maintains excellent relations with these investors, and many of whom are from Europe, and their investments fall under the EPA, Economic Partnership Agreements. As far back as 2015, concerns were raised by the transportation sector that they were being squeezed out of the opportunities created by the growth in the number of hotels and therefore visitors, as many foreign hotel investors were beginning to vertically integrate into other areas like transportation, thereby causing monies to be earned to leave the country. I am certain that the Minister of Foreign Affairs and leader of government business is aware that there were a series of discussions with the EU which began in early 2016. And then there was a bit of activity called an election. But even though those discussions started with Dr. McNeil, and at the time, whomever or the other relevant ministers and the EU, it continued with the ministers of foreign affairs, I understand, tourism, finance, etc. And they continued to about 2018. Now, in my understanding, not a lot has happened since 2018. But Minister, if things have happened and evolved, I'm prepared to be informed. I welcome the information. Mr. President, it is up to Jamaica under the EPA to protect its locals who, by virtue of opening up the economy to foreign competitors, have seen untold displacement. These foreign competitors have the built-in advantages of far more resources and access to cheaper financing. As we speak, the rules under the EPA, as currently written, do allow for the vertical integration and possibly horizontal of very large global companies at the expense of humble, hard-working Jamaican owners. When a tourism investor is wooed and decides to invest in Jamaica, it is usually intended in the form of hotel construction and operation. However, there's nothing stopping that investor from branching off into other areas, because we, Jamaica, have not stipulated the requisite protections for our Jamaican investors. What we end up seeing is said hotel investors entering areas like transportation, entertainment, or even water sports, thereby reducing or eliminating the ability of the indigenous Jamaican companies to provide these services and benefit from tourism as investors themselves. It is therefore time for us as a country, intent on protecting and supporting our local business owners, to review the terms of the EPA so that there can be greater benefits to Jamaicans from this vital industry. I call on the government to bring back this pressing issue to the table and find a solution to review the terms of the EPA so as to protect Jamaican businesses and their investments in the tourism industry. Juta, JCAL, Maxi Taxi, and others who are providers of transportation, and some others, larger ones, who some of them have folded, they are depending on the government to remedy this long outstanding matter. Mr. President, this is not something I just get up and talk about. It is something I discuss with the industry and those who are in transportation or other areas or tour operations. So I understand what I'm talking about. So I'll give you an example of another way that the EPA or the terms of it are impacting our local Jamaican companies. About 90% of hotels have tour desks. And these tour desks facilitate visitors who come to Jamaica for them to book excursions and go out and experience Jamaica, because there's nothing like experience in Jamaica in the fullness of it all. This is even more important as Jamaica has evolved into an almost all-inclusive product, resulting in excursions being one of the most effective ways to get some tourism revenue trickling down. The tradition is to have a third-party concession to operate that tour desk, allowing a Jamaican-owned business to eat at the table and participate in the industry at levels other than low or minimum wage positions. These opportunities are currently being eroded as the hotels are now giving said concessions to foreign-owned businesses, resulting in more and more of the tourism dollar leaving the country. Now, I know nobody in here wants that. It is time that we institute a policy whereby certain businesses are designated to be Jamaican-owned only. At some point, we have to have the political will to make the move to secure Jamaican businesses. For services, like I said before, like entertainment, landscaping, because they're going into those businesses too, water sports, and I've recently heard about staff canteen. This is real, this is real. This is not a figment of my imagination. And like I said before, transportation and tour desk. In various places, they are being moved, these businesses are being moved to foreign-owned companies, and this should not be allowed to continue. Let us ensure that the tourism dollar trickles into the economy by ensuring businesses, like I've described, remain with Jamaican companies. I cannot speak about foreign investors without speaking about and giving kudos to some of our local investors. Local investors like the Sandals Group, or the Courtly Group, or Couples Resorts, Crissa Hotel for S Hotels, or Choca Caribbean, and the myriad of small hoteliers that help to maintain the diversity of the industry. They continue to invest in their country in training, in development opportunities, international promotion alongside Jamaica, their promotion of their brand, when they put all their money together, is bigger than any government budget. And so they are carrying the weight of the brand Jamaica, and we must give them kudos for what they continue to do. It is our responsibility, therefore, to ensure that the environment is set in such a way that they can continue to do well. Now, two things go hand in hand. When you talk about investment and development, you have to talk about carrying capacity. Now, when I started in the Ministry of Tourism in 1997, and when I throw these dates out, I realize I'm aging myself, but it just shows that I've been around long enough. It was summer job, right? In that time, every day I would hear discussions about carrying capacity of the accommodation sector, carrying capacity of transportation, craft, carrying capacity. And that was because there was a recognition and awareness that development cannot be done in isolation and simply for the sake of making announcements. As such, I want to raise a concern I have in a particular with the accommodation sector, which seems to be the priority of this administration in terms of its development strategy. At varying points in time, there have been announcements made by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Tourism, and I'll give you three of them. In February 2019, the Prime Minister made an announcement in which he said, and I quote, "Within the coming decade, we could be at 50,000 new rooms. That's the magnitude of the expansion in this industry, 50,000. In January 2022, the Minister of Tourism, in a release, said, I quote, "Jamaica is undergoing its biggest hotel boom in any one year with 8,000 rooms in various stages of development, resulting in at least 24,000 jobs and 12,000 construction jobs." A few months later, in April, in his budget presentation, the minister announced, There are a total of 8,500 new rooms to be added in the next 5 years. Now, in addition to needing some consistency in the numbers, I must ask the minister, where are we with the carrying capacity study? There was an announcement this year that there will be one done sometime this year. And why do I ask? It has to be of concern to all well-thinking Jamaicans, especially those focused on the environment, Senator Fraser-Binns, the impact that these increased numbers of hotel rooms will have on the country. Where is the government's plan to build out the capacity to ensure that we can accommodate this type of growth that is projected? Do we have the infrastructure, the human resource capacity to sustainably manage this? What about water? I heard the Prime Minister say recently that water is preventing some NHT development, right? So how are we managing that demand? What about electricity, telecommunication, transportation, or housing? Okay, I'm coming to beach access. These are some critical areas that have to be addressed for any expansion of this size, carrying capacity. Otherwise, the strain will be felt by Jamaicans in our everyday goings and comings because the impact is guaranteed, especially as the project developments are so concentrated in one area, the North Coast, and one type, all-inclusive. Mr. President, last year, I called for there to be a development policy to guide what types of investments and where the developments are to be located, because it would be unfortunate for us to continue grabbing at all investments to the detriment of our people and environment. Let us be smart and considerate with development plans. The time is now for that. A People's National Party government will undertake to have a defined development policy that guides this process because we are mindful of the impact this current approach is having. We welcome investments, but we must be guided by the requisite studies so that we develop in a sustainable way. Now, in reviewing this tourism portfolio, I had to touch a little on marketing. And I must pose a few questions for Jamaica to consider and the minister to hopefully answer. I believe that for any country with limited resources like ours, it is crucial that we are strategic with how we spend and manage resources. The Jamaica Tourist Board has a very long history of high-performing staff located in major cities in our source markets. And over the years, they have made us very proud for selling Jamaica to tour operators and other travel partners. They are professionals in the truest sense of the word and must be congratulated for the successes they have had over the years. Along with technology and well-experienced teams working with our private sector partners, the need for delegations from Jamaica almost weekly to carry out the work they are employed there to do should be reviewed. We have to work smarter and be more efficient with our money. It's not to say that there's never any need for delegations from Jamaica, but we have to begin to see where we can rationalize. The question, therefore, is, how are we marketing the destination post-COVID? Do we still visit markets in person when up to 80% of the work can be done using technology? Do we need to spend money to fly to all these capitals when we could be using, as I said before, technology? We have to spend money in the best way possible. The United States continues to be our largest market. And as one expert puts it, we have not even scratched the surface of the US, which is in our backyard. This makes me have to ask, why then are we going after markets that we have no chance of materializing or delivering for Jamaica anytime soon? when a deeper dive into the US, Canada, or even South America can deliver more almost immediately? Do we need to be pursuing markets in the Middle East, like Dubai, for example? What are the studies that are telling us about that market, where we still don't even have air service and might only produce a couple hundred visitors who we are not really prepared to handle, whether culturally or gastronomically? And I know the minister made an announcement of a possible unique flight in 2021 that he was working on with Emirates. It's not happening. It hasn't happened, and we need to be realistic. And since we know opening new markets requires significant investments, I have to ask the minister, how will these be funded? Will it be by taking money from our main markets, which we haven't yet tapped out, to pursue a couple hundred visitors per year? Plain and simple, what are we getting from any new market like Dubai or India? Because for the past 3 years, we have been hearing of attendance at World's Fair and other shows like Arabian Travel Mart. But we have nothing tangible to show for these big spends. Is it the best way to spend limited resources? So what about South America? I know the minister went there recently, but for nearly 20 years, the JTB has been working on the South American market. And many advances were made, even though there were some setbacks. Airlift discussions and negotiation led to daily flights from Copa, in addition to regularly scheduled flights from LATAM and Avianca. COVID came and disrupted some of that, but still sufficient groundwork was done, and today there is still some business. I believe the time is ripe now for Jamaica to focus its efforts on an almost ready market, which provides opportunities that are low-hanging. In 2023, the potential that exists with Chile and Argentina, Peru, Brazil, and even Uruguay connecting through Panama via Copa, we should be using more of our capital and efforts in these markets where preliminary work has already been done, and the infrastructure is there to support the chance of growth in arrivals, rather than unrealistic dreams of the Far East, where we currently do not have direct or even worthwhile indirect flights for the sake of tourism. Wise men will confirm that one should fish in waters where there is fish. Whether you spear fish or net fish is dependent on the situation and the circumstances. However, it makes no sense to go into waters we have no knowledge about before fully exploring those which we already know, or at least have enough of a credible start. So I must ask, I know that the JTB is a marketing agency that operates on market research, and I know this because I worked there for years. I know that every decision for a new program was based on the result of market research. How are the decisions to pursue these new markets being made, therefore? Do we still depend on research, or is it being arbitrary? I don't know. I just want to know. I think it's a reasonable question. Mr. President, the buzzword in the industry today is linkages. But I have to ask, do we really know what linkages mean in full? More often than not, we talk about agriculture and manufacturing and transportation. And even though these are critical areas and are constantly evolving, I want us to spend a little time to consider other areas and broaden our thinking to look at how linkages can help to solve some of the impacts of tourism on our communities and environment. Let's take a look, for example, at labor. It is no secret that the industry is facing a labor shortage, as many of those who work in it are being poached by overseas recruitment agencies and entities, and even by the cruise industry. This has impacted the labor market, and with the proposed growth in room stock, we have to find a solution to this problem, because the last thing we want to do is import labor. In a discussion with my colleagues, Because the fact is, we discuss matters in a joined-up way to find solutions that are cross-cutting. We contemplated what the solutions might entail. We believe that the shortage could be filled by others who reside outside of the tourism belt, in places like St. Catherine and Clarendon and all over. But what is preventing people who are in these places who might be qualified from taking up jobs on the North Coast? The fact is, housing. Yes. Housing is the issue. Affordable housing. Mr. President, it is my considered view, and that of this side, that we must begin to have discussions with investors who are seeking to build out large resorts, that they also build high-density, low-impact, dormitory-style housing for their workers, similar to what we see the model of the 138 living model. We can have the, whatever it may be, tourism living model. Because the fact is, people don't want to necessarily leave home and relocate fully, you know. They just want to work and be able to work. So if housing is available, then we can fill the housing gap by being creative with our housing solution. So this is an opportunity for us to speak to our partners so that in tandem, when they're building the hotel, they're building the housing for the workers.
Good point.
Before we sign on the dotted line, these are the kind of discussions that we're to have with investors. Because the fact is, their investment, their construction, their development will have an impact on our daily lives. This is a linkage opportunity for Jamaican business in construction to work in tandem with the hotel developer and find a viable housing solution. The second linkage opportunity that I am proposing is to solve the issue of waste management. No. In St. James, in Western Jamaica, along the tourism belt, the retirement landfill is the only facility used for waste management, and this is woefully inadequate, especially as we hear each day of the problems there and the threat of fire and all kinds of issues. It is time, when we're securing investments, we tie incentives to the provision of certain services and infrastructure like waste management. With technology that is available today in modern construction of landfills, why aren't we doing like what countries like Canada are doing, working with using technology to develop new landfill models? Because the fact is, when you have a hotel of 1,000 rooms, think of the waste impact. We have Princess in Green Island being constructed. You have Hard Rock being constructed in Rose Hall, compounded with all of what already exists, plus residential and other commercial. Retirement dump is insufficient. And so, when we are speaking to investors, because I believe they are reasonable people, even the ones who are here already, we can find solutions together. So I'm calling on the minister to begin to have those discussions with the tourism investors, those who are to come and those who are here, to begin to look at these issues, and to also maybe also join with Minister Samuda on the water issues, because there are water issues. Already Negril is burdened with water issues. When you add Princess to that in Green Island, it's going to create problems for the people living in Westmoreland. Water, electricity, telecommunications, these are, and I see where Flow is doing a major investment in telecommunications and working with the tourism areas. So that's the kind of thinking that we need to have. Otherwise, if we do not find these solutions, people will continue to see tourism as an extractive industry rather than one that is transforming. So we have to think outside of the box and find creative policy solutions to the issues that confront us. I'm certain the investors will work and collaborate with us. Mr. President, as I wrap up, I have to touch on one thing. beach access. This is a vexed issue today, and one that I, as the shadow for tourism, must address. It is equally important to Jamaicans and investors, and we believe a balanced view must be taken to find a solution that allows for all to coexist. Mr. President, according to my reading, I understand that there's somewhere in the region of about 50 public beaches across the island, controlled by the state. And recently there have been many calls and outcries about Jamaicans' access or lack thereof to beaches. Some have said that it's because of tourism why Jamaicans have not been able to access beaches. During the administration of the last PNP government, under the tourism leadership of Dr. Wickham McNeil, an ambitious project was designed by the TEF to upgrade public beaches so that Jamaicans could have access to beaches no different than tourists at a resort. At least one public beach was to be developed per parish and maintained at a standard befitting the people. Funds and technical expertise were identified. The plan was in place. In 2016, there were elections and a change in administration, and the project came to a standstill. As of today, according to the TEF, only one beach has been upgraded, Harmony Park, formerly Dump Up in the Montego Bay. I have been advised by the executive director that there are 3 set to be developed in 2024 and another 9 by 2029. And I noticed in the list in an article that was in the papers recently that I did not see the iconic Hellshire Beach. We have seen over the years the constant degradation of that beach, and it seems all heads are buried in the sand on this one. So I decided to check with some experts in beach restoration to get an understanding, because I almost feel like Hellshire can't be restored. That's the impression I get. But I'm assured that it can in fact be restored, and that in their estimation, and this is not after doing any studies, but in just general estimation, that it could cost in the region of about $3 million. So let's say, I say US dollars. I say $5 million. With the billions earned by tourism through the TEF, it is time the ministry earmarks funds for Hellshire. Today, I call on the government, the Minister of Tourism, to advise the nation of the approved budget, number of beaches, timeline, and opening schedule, plus a maintenance plan, because we have seen that we apparently don't know how to maintain. We didn't maintain Old Hospital Park. We didn't maintain the one on Harbour, on Howard Boulevard. And we haven't maintained Catherine Hall Sports Complex. It's rotting in front of our eyes. So we have a maintenance problem in this country. So in the plan that the minister, I'm calling for from the ministry, must be a maintenance plan for the beaches. It is time we also consider the reservation of specific areas for public beach access, free from future private development. If we can reserve parcels of land for agricultural or residential development, then we can also reserve land for recreation, and beach access falls into this category. The leader of the opposition has made it very clear that a PNP government has as a priority a country that provides all Jamaicans and for all Jamaicans and not just for some. The access to well-managed and maintained public beaches is one way to guarantee this balanced and equitable Jamaica. This side is committed to ensuring that every Jamaican has access to beaches, and we're going to work to ensure that a parent can go to the beach with his family. However, it is not a license to go there to hustle and harass. We have to work together to protect the state against those who wish to exploit it. We believe in law and order and freedom to experience recreational facilities in our own country. As I close this short presentation, Mr. President.
And short it is, right, Sherene?
This is not your presentation. Mr. President and members, and through you to the wider Jamaica, here and abroad, the American poet Robert Frost, in his epic piece, The Road Not Taken, famously expressed, "Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled, and that has made all the difference." As Shadow Minister for the important sector, the easier opportunity is just to oppose. It often presents itself. Yet I have chosen to take the less traveled road. In my State of the Nation debate, in all of them, and in all my press releases and statements, I have ensured that I am responsible and measured, as I have done today, because I not only highlight the challenges, but I put forward workable proposals and solutions to resolve the challenges. At least consider them. Tourism stakeholders will tell you, I am reachable, always amicable.
Yes, Sinclair. But Sinclair knows that. Sinclair knows that.
My tourism stakers will tell you that I'm also always willing to incorporate their perspectives in my deliberations. That remains my commitment. And as it now appears that the tide across the country has now changed, I give my assurance to the people of this country that should I become the minister, I will continue to seek and ensure their full participation and that of tourism stakeholders, as together we can redesign the tourism industry to make it not just more resilient against competition in this region and beyond, but also resilient against changes in market preferences and against our greatest competitor, climate change. As we move forward, we need to be cognizant of how we plan and what we do for the future. Climate change, geopolitics, carrying capacity, and investment facilitation are just some of the myriad of things that must occupy our minds as we move our industry and country forward. We must begin immediately to work on the design of a new 10-year master plan for sustainable development. And that could take us from 2025 to 35, because we need some work to be done from now until then. That plan must consider disaster mitigation, inclusivity, and profitability by the incorporation of innovation and technology where possible as we move tourism to the country beyond the beach. Mr. President, we are required at this moment to think big and outside of the box, to work with our investors, foreign and local, to ensure that the benefits of tourism do not elude the native Jamaican businesses and native Jamaicans. The job of a responsible government is to balance these needs and keep an honest and open dialogue with the people. Doing that job well is my resolve. Mr. President, the time has come for us to move in a new direction with policies based on planting trees that will provide shade for generations to come, and not based on short-term glory or adulation. This is my commitment. This is my focus. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Allen. Minister?
Not intended to do any further business today. I wish to move the motion for adjournment, but believe there is an important matter to be raised by Senator Gale.
I'm prepared to entertain it so long as Senator Gale recognizes that we are on some time constraint.
You know, President, brevity was never one of my strong points. As a trade unionist, and then you morphed me as a politician. Mr. President, I rise today on this point of adjournment after those two interesting presentations to recognize what I consider to be a very critical issue in Jamaica. This issue is one that is normally advocated by Senator Longmore, and she not being here today has asked me to recognize Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Mr. President, breast cancer is one of those critical chronic diseases that affects women in society. And I'm learning along the way that it also affects men. And it tends to affect men at the older part of their life. But, President, the objective that we must always embark on is education and early detection. And diagnosing cancer at an early stage creates an ease in terms of treatment. But, President, whilst early detection is key, I want to represent today what I'm learning about the journey in terms of treatment and what women essentially have to go through. How many of us inside this chamber may have known someone who either passed from breast cancer, either is going through treatment of breast cancer, or is a cancer survivor? There are many persons out there. Some, they don't speak about it. They keep it as a silent issue. President, I have a friend who has gone through that journey of breast cancer. She's a survivor. But in taking it through the stages of the anxiety, just imagine, you're going through your own personal physical examination, and then you feel something, it creates that anxiety. Do I go to the doctor? Do I really want to find out about this? But then when you go to the doctor and you do the mammogram or the test, and the doctor says to you that you have to wait on the result, that period of anxiety that you go through, that period of nervousness. And then now, when you actually go to the doctor, and you want to hear what the doctor is saying, but you really don't want to hear. And when the doctor says to you that there is a confirmation that you now have breast cancer, you get numb. And that is when, colleagues, the life changes for that individual. That is when it not only changes physically, but mentally. And President, in going through the stages, it's not easy, because you now recognize that, why, my entire life changed. And you're now going through the process now of the myriad of chemotherapy. And having gone through chemotherapy, I'm understanding that it's very challenging. And every time you go to a session, is a different you coming out. But apart from chemotherapy, then you have that other stage of radiation that totally changes your body. But outside of the moment of stress and the anxiety, the body changes. You lose a hair, the fingernails get dark, your skin starts to change. It's a good thing, President, that you have all these fashionable wigs that can be worn to lend support. But the question is, it changes the body and it changes the mind. And so women have to go through this traumatic experience. President, whilst it's a chronic illness, it's not a death sentence. One of the things I will say is that a critical illness plan is important. And if you can save towards these eventualities, I'm commending and recommending that these savings takes place. As a trade unionist, I'm also strongly encouraging that when we have health plans must take into consideration provisions towards these critical illnesses. President, you know, the objective is always to educate. The objective is always to promote early detection. But one of the things I'd want to leave for those who are listening, for those persons who have to go through this, the inspiration of hope, care, and support is critical. This is the time in life when those who go through the journey of treatment need hope, they need care, and they need support. And President, the support, you know, it ought not to be the question of what can I do for you, but more I will do this for you in terms of lending the support. And Mr. President, today in recognition of this month in terms of cancer awareness, I want to salute all cancer survivors. It's a critical journey, and it's a journey that needs to be understood. We need to speak about it, and we need to create the awareness. But most importantly, I urge and encourage the support. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Gale, and it is not without significance that both contributors today are males. And he's wearing a lovely green outfit there. Senator Dr. Floyd Morris.
I don't want to say you're colorblind. Mr. President, I do rise to give support to this most worthy motion that has been moved by my colleague and friend, Senator Kevin Gale, on the issue of breast cancer month. And Mr. President, Senator Gale has highlighted a number of issues that are very important for the public to understand as it relates to breast cancer. And most importantly, Mr. President, is that it is not a death sentence for any individual who developed the disease. And once it is detected, there are treatments that are available and also support systems that are available for those individuals. And I have always said to individuals, whether it be relating to this particular issue of breast cancer or developing any other type of disease, it is very good to make others around you be aware of the situation, because it increases the support structures. And just keeping it to yourself cause you to internalize the problem and make matters worse. But when you share it with others, it provides an avenue, it provides a mechanism for you to go through the problem with greater ease and greater support. And I want to underscore that and make an appeal for our Jamaican brothers and sisters to give all the support to those individuals who have developed breast cancer, and make sure that they understand that this is not something that is confined only to females, because we have seen males who have developed the disease as well. There was one troubling statistics that I heard this week from the Minister of Health in his presentation in the Parliament, where he said, I think it was an average of 1,500 individuals developing breast cancer annually in Jamaica, and over 500 of those individuals succumbing to the disease. And if I heard those figures well, Mr. President, it's really, really disturbing, because what it is speaking to is a situation where we really need to pay greater attention to this particular disease, and to make sure that, our health systems are able to respond to these individuals more adequately. Mr. President, I support the motion and make an appeal for greater support for the individuals who have developed this disease in our country. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Morris. And I'm sure that it would not have escaped any of us who were in the Senate for some period of time that amongst us is Senator Sapphire Longmore, who is a breast cancer survivor, and we who were sitting in the Senate with her at the time recognize her bravery, how she fought the disease, and also recognize the fact that she made it public and held herself as an example to the people of Jamaica. So we recognize her. Minister?
Might the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed?
Thank you very much. The question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor?
Aye.
This Honorable Senate now stands adjourned. I'm sorry. Minister?
President, I had not officially asked for the suspension of the State of the Nation debate.
Okay, thank you. So the question is that the State of the Nation debate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? That's what I said, The question is that the Senate be suspended and continued on a date to be fixed. Those in favor? And now the question is the Senate be adjourned to a date to be fixed. So Honorable Senate now stands adjourned. Thank you very much all.
It's Friday, October 27. In the headlines, water supply restrictions lifted and more rain expected this weekend. In business news, a number of tourists set to grow by 2050. Regionally, Bayesians share views on education reform. Internationally, General Assembly held after failed resolutions about war on Gaza. In sports, we have the latest on West Indies women versus Pakistan's 3-match 50-over series. And in entertainment news, Rihanna's anticipated comeback tour. This is the Weekend News on PBC Jamaica. I'm Simone Absalom Gale. The National Water Commission has announced the removal of water supply regulations that were implemented as a result of the drought conditions in the Kingston and St. Andrew area. The Commission, in a release, explains that as at October 26, 2023, the two major storage systems in the KSA are now as follows. Heritage